Again, good morning and good afternoon. It's 10 a.m. in Brazilian time, and the National Academy of Medicine Brazil welcomes you all. And the Academy is very proud of having Professor Moura-Neto leading this program. Professor Moura-Neto is a young and bright nephrologist from Brazil that is also a member of the Young Leadership Program of the National Academy of Medicine. Since 2018, he's been very active also in this field. And I want not only to thank him for all the effort, but also to congratulate for this scientific program. My role here is just to welcome you all. And I know that we have excellent scientific program, and we are very proud also of having many of the most important nephrologists of Brazil in membership of the National Academy of Medicine. And this includes Professor and academician Miguel Riella, who is gonna take over now and will represent the National Academy in this program, as well as Professor and academician Suassuna. Moura-Neto, I don't know if you want to say some words now in the beginning or not, but this is your show. And again, thank you very much and congratulations. Go ahead, Moura.
Thank you, President Professor Rubens Belfort. It's a great honor to launch the book here at the National Academy. And I'd like to, is Professor Riella already here? Or shall we start? Okay, I believe I can share my screen and just start my presentation.
Professor Riella is in Florianopolis because of the pandemic situation. I tell you that Florianopolis is a very nice place, but the connections over there is not very easy. I'm pretty sure he's joining us in minutes. Academician Suassuna is already here. Go ahead, Moura-Neto. The screen is okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again, President Professor Rubens Belfort and Professor Miguel Riella. Hello, colleagues and friends and authors of Nephrology Worldwide. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. I have been in touch with most of the authors, and I have had the opportunity to meet some of you in person. Actually, I was planning that the launch of the book being the opportunity, maybe a huge celebration. Due to the pandemic, it was not possible, but a virtual symposium made a more inclusive event and allow us to bring together, even virtually, colleagues from every corner of the globe. Today, we're expecting that more than 100 colleagues will connect us, which is exactly one of the goals of the Nephrology Worldwide initiative. I'm also happy to launch this book at the National Academy of Medicine in Brazil, online host today. On behalf of the co-editors, I'd like to thank the National Academy of Medicine, which is among the most traditional and prestigious institutions in Brazil. So what is nephrology like in your country? If you want to simplify the Nephrology Worldwide initiative, this is the main question we try to answer when we first designed this project. Actually, it's not a single question, it becomes multiple questions, and the answers help to describe the scenario of nephrology in the country. The project began not as an organized idea, but as mere curiosity. I started to think about that while I was still a nephrology fellow, maybe 7, 8 years ago. And every time I shared this idea with friends, the excitement encouraged me to take the next step, which was find the right partners to this project. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to connect and meet many international colleagues while editing another book. Two of them, José Carolino Divino and Claudio Ronco, were perfect partners to this task. Carolino has a quite unique career, living and working in many different countries, Sweden, Belgium, Mexico, Switzerland, Brazil, and Germany. His nomadic and successful journey has made him a complete nephrologist, a mix of an academic and a practitioner, and one of the most international professionals in the field. as I wrote in the preface, the right guy for the Nephrology Worldwide project, and Professor Ronco needs no introduction, one of the most iconic nephrologists known for addressing controversial and important topics in the field. So our team was complete, and we are prepared to face the challenge of making the Nephrology Worldwide happen at last. But we still had to find a major international publisher that would interest this project that was not only a medical project, but also developed for stakeholders of nephrology, and Springer was a great spot. And one of the leading medical publishers with a wide and global reach and scientific and academic prestige, publishing journals such as Nature, Journal of Nephrology, and the respected magazine Scientific American. First, I contacted Richard Lansing, the editorial director of clinical medicine of Springer, based in New York, and he's put us in contact with Vanessa Shimabukuro. I first visited Vanessa in São Paulo at the Springer Nature office in October 2018, just 4 months after Richard's response. And finally, together with Claudio Ronco and Carolino Divino, we wrote a definitive book project that after a few weeks was approved by Springer. So in January 2019, we are able to start the invitations. Over the course of several months, we carefully curated a selection of nephrologists around the world to take on the daunting task of providing a comprehensive description of nephrology in the countries. We tried so hard to have representatives for each continent and region. We invited colleagues from about 65 countries. A few of them were not able to deliver the chapters by the proposed deadline, so we could not include it in our first edition. Our goal, which I believe we achieved, to make a very inclusive project. This is a map from the first chapter of the book that highlights the 51 countries included in Nephrology Worldwide. About 5.7 billion people are represented in the book, and it covers all continents and regions as our initial plan predicted. The 10 most populated countries are also included in this book. So we developed a 3-page guidelines for the contributors in which we briefly describe the project, define the goal of the book, the target audience, and general editorial rules, such as the number of authors. We suggested that coordinators should select authors from different geographic regions within the country and with different backgrounds or areas of interest, so we can have a really comprehensive overview of nephrology in the field. And this guideline also provided a checklist of all areas the author should address. And we finalized with our central question: how is nephrology, or what is nephrology like in your country? And a reminder that the authors should be very didactic, since they are presenting the realities to a foreign audience unfamiliar with the specificities of healthcare and practice in their home country. In addition to these guidelines, we developed a chapter template in which we suggested an order of sections and approach. We did so in order to avoid missing information and to create a pattern throughout the book to make the life of readers easier, since they would become familiar with the layout of chapters after reading just one. In each chapter, we include also an initial table with general information about the countries, such as population, currency, language, GDP, and specific data on nephrology, for example, the number of nephrologists, the name of the national society, data on incidence and prevalence of end-stage renal disease, number of kidney transplantations per year, and number of patients on each dialysis modality. Of course, the guidelines help the authors, and we received the first drafts quite complete. Most of the authors followed the template, in addition to the cultural barriers, which were already expected. We had a few other obstacles during this process. Political instability and economic crisis were happening in some countries right at the moment we are working on the book. So we had to be very understanding with potential delays. And indeed, we had linguistic barriers. Some countries sent their chapters in their native language, and we had to help them to translate to English. So looking back, I believe that is what makes the Nephrology Worldwide project a unique, international, and consequently hard to be repeated. If you decide to have chapters from every corner of the globe written by local nephrologists who are practicing and living there, so you must face these linguistic barriers. The cycle of writing, reviewing, commenting, and revising took around a year and a half. In the end, we had 53 chapters, in addition to the 51 countries chapters. The book included 2 introductory chapters, one from the editors, and another written by the leadership of ISM. More than 300 authors from 51 different nations participated in this book. The great diversity of nationalities and cultures certainly makes Nephrology Worldwide one of the most international books in nephrology. Finally, during the production of the book, we had a terrific news for the field. Nephrology was laureated for the Nobel Prize in Medicine as Peter Hadcliffe. So we invited him to write the foreword, which he kindly accepted and presented us with an amazing and very elegant foreword. Professor Hermógenes, together with Cortinovis, also wrote a book review on Nephrology Worldwide, which was just accepted for publication at Nephron. We also feature a quote from this book review in our website. So editing this book was a transformative process for me in many ways, and I hope readers will have similar experience. It changed my view and perspective on the field, and even more importantly, it raised several questions, not only medical, but also socioeconomic and political issues in the field. Although we feel we have finished the project, a book, and we have only just started the Nephrology Worldwide mission, let's start with this simple yet complex goal of transcending borders and connecting nephrologists around the world, and is completed by drawing attention to global nephrology issues. We believe that the Nephrology Worldwide is an ongoing initiative. The book will be updated with a new edition maybe every 3-4 years, and we will extend it to other countries for sure. We developed a website, a friendly platform where readers can send feedback and even corrections on the current edition. They can also apply to participate in future editions of the book as a reviewer or as an author. They can get orientation on how to cite chapters or the whole book, and we also provide a list of articles and publications where the book has been cited. So far, the book has been cited before its publication in these 3 recent articles from Nature, Blood Purification, and Kidney 360. The website also shows where you to buy the book with a different link to these bookstores. And we have more than 1,000 visitors over the past 5 weeks from every continent and region. We also just created an Instagram account, and you are all invited to connect with us there and to be part of a larger network in the future. Finally, the virtual event today was designed in alignment with the Nephrology Worldwide mission. Some colleagues suggested to record the presentation before, so we'd have no surprise and a perfect and smooth schedule. However, we felt that it would be quite symbolic to have all of us live together, connected at the same universal time with the same goal of discussing nephrology. We know we can have that delays, no shows, technical issues, but this vulnerability and imperfection should not get in the way, especially during our book launch of fulfilling our mission today. A world with less borders, more integrated, connected, and with equitable healthcare access. This is my desire for the next generation. It was also in my dedication statement to my kids. Some might say this is impossible or not. I believe we shall try it. At least it might be fun. Thank you so much, all friends, authors, co-editors. You made this pioneering initiative quite possible, and I hope you have enjoyed this journey as much as I did. Feel free to follow me on my professional pages on LinkedIn or ResearchGate, and feel free to contact me at any time. I hope to meet you all in person at Future Conference, hopefully when the pandemic is over. Thank you so much.
Professor Riella is already in. So from now on, he's the chair. Okay, Moura-Neto, congratulations.
Thank you, Professor.
Good morning. I'm sorry for the late connection here. I had some problems with the internet here.
Living paradise has also some negative aspects.
That's right. Well, we had I understand that Dr. José Moura had introduced the subject, and we can proceed. Let me see. I haven't opened the agenda now. Rubens, why don't you introduce the second and I introduce Claudio Ronco later?
Moura-Neto, why don't you introduce Professor José Carolino Divino-Filho, please?
Okay, I already introduced Professor José Carolino Divino-Filho, but I will introduce him again. He's an excellent nephrologist. He's based on Sweden. He was born in Brazil, but he's based on in Sweden and at Karolinska Institute. And he's a good friend. He was a co-editor of this book, and I'd like to invite him to give his talk.
So, thank you, Moura. I hope I'm not on mute. And thank you, Professor Belfort and Riella. I had a glitch. I had a big problem now. I made one of my sons run to the apartment here to help me. So I hope I can share the slides, because if I cannot share the slides, I will talk. So how do I do to share the slides here now? Let me get share screen.
To share screen, yes.
Okay. Yeah, there. Is it there? No?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So my talk will be about highlights. We all know, as we are Italians and Brazilians and Swedish, everybody likes football. And in football, if you cannot watch a game on a live, and if you like the team, you want to videotape it, or you want to look at the highlights. And if your team wins, maybe you want to see the whole videotape. But if your team not win, maybe you want to see only the highlights. And the highlights here are about Nephrology Worldwide. First of all the credits to you, Moura-Neto. I know that Claudio and I have helped you, but you are the one who was behind from the beginning. The inception of this project was a very long way and hard way through it. And congratulations and thanks to all the authors, more than 300 people participating in the production, in the creation of this book. And when we come to the highlights, now let's see how I'm going to send the slides. So when we come to the highlights, we decided we would have a section in this book where we would give it to each country, the authors, to write something, some feature, some history, some event, something from that country, or more than one thing, that were highlights of this country. So we start by history here. You start by history here. You see a lot of names known. Some names maybe unknown by many of us, but from the country where they come from, they are well known. And there are many, many others that are part of this story. My slide is not moving now. Let me see. Okay. And there are also stories of colleagues, and many of you who are here today probably have lived this type of life sometime in your career. You are sent abroad, you go for training, faraway places, long periods away from friends and family, and you come back home and you are going to propagate what you learned, you're going to replicate what you saw, you're going to create new things. So this is also a very important part. So as this is a highlights, you needed to read the book chapter by chapter, where we have 51 countries in this first edition. You're going to see diseases in the kidney that you may not have seen before or even heard before. Probably people have heard of dengue, of leptospirosis, and maybe not of Nipah virus. If you don't come from Asia, maybe you haven't heard that. Then traditional medicines like K-Paloa, all that lead to kidney disease. We think about the star fruit, fish gallbladder toxicity. If I would ask how many of you can raise your hand and tell me that you have seen a patient like that, I don't think many of us. So this is time to learn. Melioidosis and use of poison substance. So there are a lot to learn. And for example, in Bolivia, more than 4 million people live at high altitudes. It means over 2,500 meters above sea level. About 10% of this population develops high altitude polycythemia. I think it's echoing. So what happens is that when they screen these polycythemia healthy subjects, 40% of them have some degree of proteinuria. This means estimations that about 300 people are at risk for kidney disease. Another disease which is well known, especially for us older doctors who have been working for longer time than young ones, the Balkan endemic nephropathy, originally described in 1956, with high prevalence in some of the countries that are here and they are part of the book. When we talk about acute renal failure, I have to say personally that for me, acute renal failure is the same as acute kidney injury. And I think when London was bombed in the Second World War, and Eric Bywater, for the first time, verified the histopathology of Crush syndrome at Hammersmith. There's a new area was starting in terms of Crush syndrome, renal failure, and treatment of these people. But later, in 1962 in Argentina, Giantonio described the first case of acute renal failure and hemolytic uremic syndrome. Yeah. Today, what we know is more predominant in many countries. The reason for acute renal failure, acute kidney injury is acute gastroenteritis. In Bangladesh, the incidence increased up to 24% during monsoon time. So chronic kidney disease worldwide, poverty, healthcare, relegation, poor governance are very important add factors to the prevalence of chronic kidney disease in the world today. It's not acceptable that creatinine cannot be measured in many patients hospitalized around the world. And then we see a lot of socioeconomic disparities in very underdeveloped countries and or underprivileged countries. The CKD population is much younger than in the Western, well-developed countries where the older populations are more prevalent with CKD. Most countries later stage of CKD diagnosis. Prevention seems not to be an important thing. All the things we're going to be seeing in the book. It's sad when you read it, the chapters written by our colleagues, and talk about a shortage of nephrologists and renal nurses. When you see Uganda, they have 10 nephrologists for 45 million inhabitants. And we have the brain drain. Doctors from places like that, well educated, they move to other countries where the resources, not only better paid, but the resources to be a doctor, nephrologist, are much better. Africa has many countries where there is no local training. And this comes one country which I praise a lot, South Africa. South Africa has several fellowship programs and for doctors from other countries in the sub-Saharan Africa. So this cooperation is very important. You're going to see in this book. Cambodian nephrologists trained in Japan. The Japanese Society of Nephrology has an agreement with Cambodia. Even France, Australia, and Thailand also helping them. In Oman, most nephrologists are not on money, no money. Recently, they started a fellowship program. But on the other side, the dialysis nurses, there has been a program of nurse training education launched in 1997. Up to today, 344 nephrology nurses have graduated from this program. And we'll talk about Ireland. The vast majority of the Irish consultants today, they are 50, according to the book, will have had some of their training abroad, or they have held positions as consultant, attendant, faculty in other countries. What's going to be the future of nephrology? Well, there is a lack of appeal. Young doctors or young internists, medical students are going to other specialties. France is one of the exceptions. He described it well in this chapter of France. The reasons why they are getting nephrology back to be ranked among the first medical specialties. Diversity of activities is one of the positive aspects. Well, renal replacement therapy gaps, availability gaps worldwide. There are prevalences in countries, prevalence of renal replacement therapy, which is 10 patients per million population, and extends to countries where this prevalence goes over 2,000 patients per million population. What a difference, right? Uganda again, they have in that country with 45 million people and 10 nephrologists, they have 52 hemodialysis machines. Survival rates. There is a median in the Democratic Republic of Congo, survival rate, a median 17 months. It's sad. Whereas annual has a mortality rate of 10%, which is an example for everybody. And dialysis is increasing around the world, the number of patients. And in China, it has increased over 6 years from 260,000 to 610,000 patients. Interesting things we're going to see in the book, the highlights only here: blood flow rates, reuse, reimbursement, frequency, hours per session, all different in different countries. Some people are going to be shocked because they thought that the blood flow rates should always be 300, 350. Guess what? Japan with best results is 200 milliliters per minute. No place to discussion here, just saying some facts. Modalities, private versus public. For example, in Portugal, 91% of the renal replacement therapy is private, whereas in Cuba, 100% is public. Medical workforce, for example, in Turkey, there are many internists working as dialysis responsible doctors. They have to take a test, and if they pass, they can work taking care of dialysis patients. And in Mexico, most of the doctors working with PD, they are not nephrologists, they are internists. And a beautiful thing, home dialysis. This is part of the future and is already the present. And a very present in Australia, New Zealand, Denmark, and Canada. Renal transplantation worldwide, challenge, Iran. Living unrelated donors transplantation was very famous, and many people still talk about that, but this is changing. They have gone over a lot for diseased donors, and the Shiraz experience, the 6th largest city in Iran, they have not had any living unrelated donor renal transplantation since 2008. Ethiopia, a beautiful project when you read in the book, between local medical school and an American university. Brazil is proud to be Brazilian, the largest public funded program in the world. Spain, the role model. And I ask you, read Croatia and read what they have been doing in terms of legislation to improve transplantation. Healthcare services, registries, and programs. Cuba, Uruguay. Cuba, they have a universal free healthcare service in nephrology with 56 centers in the country. And a lot of things I'm telling you, I have been in these countries. I have seen a lot of these things. Uruguay, a small country in South America with 100% free coverage for nephrology for the inhabitants of this country. Malaysia with excellent registry. Thailand with a beautiful, beautiful PD First program and CKD program. Indonesia following these steps. Please read these chapters. You're gonna really love them. Some of success stories worldwide. Albania is in the 21st century, and they are happy, and they are proud, and they are one chapter in the book. China has the global clinical trials, which is important, as we know, for development of new drugs or new therapies and other new things. Poland, in the book, in the Polish book chapter, they write something like that. In the 80s, the situation was so difficult there. Dialysis was not available for everybody. And when they travel abroad, it was like going to another planet. Today, Poland in nephrology is at the same level as any other country in the Western Europe. Well, I'm coming for the final remarks that I just want to say in the highlights from natural disasters like earthquakes, which led to Mexico to develop PD First 1985, other earthquakes in other countries led to help from us nephrologists to treat those patients with acute renal failure, to tragedies. And tragedies, we have the Chernobyl tragedy, which has left after 1995 an inheritance for children, for many of them, that has had to do with nephrology. You can read about that in the Ukrainian chapter. Exciting projects, I could name some of them: the kidney health and disease, the green nephrology, the Swiss kidney stone cohort, and interesting themes. We are going to have today our colleague from Saudi Arabia speaking here. But one interesting thing is fasting during the Ramadan month in kidney disease. So we have a lot to learn, and I want to close, and you're going to read this in the book, if I'm not mistaken, on page 216. I won't say the country, I will read the whole thing, but the last 3 lines are the most important. It's from one of the countries in the book. Actions to retake a path towards the stabilization or growth of the attention to kidney disease in all expressions have to be rethought within policies to rebuild the national health system. No simple or individual remedies seem possible at this time. But we are also certain that the country will at some point start retaking the route towards political stability, economic growth, and social development. And I would say to the colleagues of this country, you'll find it out in the book, that we are all going to be with them, and as much as we can help them to go back to where they were before, we are going to be proud of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carolino. Excellent. We're going to move forward. It's my pleasure now to introduce Claudio Ronco. Actually, Claudio does not need any introduction. Given the hour here in Brazil, I'm having a cappuccino, not Claudio. Well, Claudio may have a cappuccino there, but I'm having one, since your famous podcast, a cappuccino with Claudio Ronco. Claudio is going to address the issue of the future of nephrology, and it will be very interesting to see his view, his personal view, how or where we are heading in the future. Claudio, are you there? Claudio? Let me see if among the participants, if I see Claudio's name here. I don't see Claudio's. I don't see Claudio's name here on the participants list. Do you
Professor
see
Riella, Cláudio ainda não está na sala. Professor Moura-Neto.
Professor Riella, maybe we can move for the next section, that is
okay.
Nephrology of Nephrology Worldwide. It will be coordinated by Professor José Suassuna, and there will be 2 excellent presentations.
All right. Let's move to part 2 and invite Dr. Suassuna to coordinate this session, Trends of Nephrology Worldwide.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Thank you very much, José Moura. It's my pleasure now to move forward with our book launch and invite the participants of the second session, Trends in Nephrology Worldwide. The first presentation will be by the president of the International Society of Nephrology, Vivek Jha, who I hope is online. Oh, I see Vivek there. Hi, Vivek. How are you doing? So he'll be talking about the ISN perspective of nephrology worldwide.
Thank you, Professor Susanna. And I would like to also thank as well as congratulate José Moura-Neto, José Divino, and Claudio Ronco on the successful launch of this book. It's been a pleasure working with you. And as you presented, this book has come out to be a fantastic masterpiece, and I hope that all the colleagues around the world will find it as useful as you think it is, and we all think it is. And the effort that you all have taken in putting this together is extremely commendable. So I thank you for doing this, as well as congratulate you on the launch of this book. Also, it's fantastic to see so many of our colleagues here in this symposium or in this book launch, which also tells us a lot about the participative nature of the development of this book. Quite often, writing a book is mostly a chore for the editors. They have to chase the authors and get chapters. And it's fantastic that you have actually put together this program where all the contributors are able to come together and celebrate as a team. So well done to you. So what I'm going to do now is to talk to you a little bit from the point of view of not just myself, but also from the point of view of the International Society of Nephrology. Because the title of this book is Nephrology Worldwide, and the mission of the International Society of Nephrology is, in fact, reflected in the title of this book. The mission is advancing kidney health worldwide, and we have to do this together. So this event is really a reflection of the mission of the International Society of Nephrology as well. So what does the ISN want as its mission and vision? The ISN strives for a future where all people around the world have equitable access to all aspects of sustainable kidney health. We don't talk about kidney disease, we talk about kidney health, because that's the mission that we want to give to the world. We want to give the world a message of hope rather than a message of despair, which often is conveyed when we talk about a disease. And we want to talk about all people of the world, and equity is extremely important, which will happen only when we can work together and we keep in mind all the other unfortunate colleagues around the world who don't have access to even basic healthcare that many of us take for granted. And Dr. Divino actually described in his very quick journey throughout the world that this book provides. So we have just celebrated the World Kidney Day a couple of days ago. And what is the message of the World Kidney Day when it was first launched in the year 2006 as a program that will take the message of kidney health to all the stakeholders of kidney health community? The leaders at that time set out to say that kidney disease is common. Almost 1 in 10 to 1 in 12 of the global population has some sort of kidney disease. And now the ISN, the ASN, and ERA-EDTA have estimated that around the world, more than 850 million people have some form of kidney disease. We also wanted the world to know that kidney disease can be potentially harmful, so that we need to identify it early, and we need to use appropriate methods to make sure that those harms don't come to pass. But again, the message of hope there was kidney disease is treatable if caught early. So we need to really come together and work to make that happen. Here is kidney disease in numbers worldwide. I'm not going to read these individual numbers to you. I'm sure as aware nephrologists, you are all aware of it. You know, the number of people who develop and die of acute kidney injury every year, the fact that kidney disease is now the third fastest growing cause of death. We know that there are about 3 million people worldwide, but many of us don't know the numbers of people with kidney failure who die without getting dialysis every year because they don't have access to dialysis, and most of those people live in deprived parts of the world. Kidney disease right now is 16th in the list of causes of death worldwide, but it is projected that it will become 5th highest cause of death in the global population in another 19 years or so. What is also important to point out that kidney disease is an important cause of catastrophic healthcare expenditure. So for people who don't have access to insurance, they have to meet the cost of treatment of kidney disease from their own pocket, which leads them to often sell their assets and descend into poverty or get buried further down into poverty. Data from Global Burden of Disease also shows that the kidney disease burden is disproportionate in the global south, and the global south comprises of areas in African continent, many parts of South America, Latin America, and of South and Southeast Asia. So those are the parts of the world that are badly affected right now, and which is where the largest growth of kidney disease is also projected around the world. There are a number of kidney disease treatment gaps that we can identify around the world. We did talk a little bit about the rapidly changing disease burden, and also that there is a large number of undiagnosed and untreated population around the world. Dr. Divino did point out the inadequate workforce, the small number of nephrologists in many countries, and in many countries, if care remains dependent on physicians only, it is going to be impossible to provide. We have, or the communities have, given disproportionate focus to curative care, and preventative programs have not been prioritized in many countries. And in the end, whenever care is also delivered, quite often it is not evidence-based, and therefore the patients, even when they get to the healthcare, are not able to derive full benefit of appropriate medical care. And what is that appropriate medical care? There is a lot that we can do, and it doesn't take very much. Often we talk about kidney disease being expensive to treat. There are many, many simple things that we can do which will either prevent development of kidney disease or slow down its progression. And they're all listed here. You know them very well. I'm not going to read them out aloud to you. But the good thing is that the global kidney health community is making progress. Almost on a yearly basis now, for the last few years or so, we are seeing new progress in basic science, which is being translated into clinical practice. And only a couple of years ago, a major breakthrough was the introduction of SGLT2 inhibitors. And now it seems like the indication for SGLT2 inhibitors is going to expand pretty much to many types of kidney disease. And we are very excited and looking forward to results of more trials that are going to come in. This slide talks about the philosophy of the ISN. And that is what we must commit ourselves to as the global health community. We must remain true to the principles of equity, sustainability, and develop solutions that are participative. What does participative mean? Which means all the stakeholders must participate in developing a solution, and they must collaborate in implementing that solution. And finally, the solutions need to be responsive. What does the responsivity mean? Responsivity means that we must use the resources that are available and in that particular geography. So whatever is appropriate for United States of America may not be appropriate for Brazil, because the resources available in Brazil are different. And the same may not be appropriate for Ethiopia, for example, because Ethiopia has a different set of resources. So all the solutions should not be a one-size-fits-all, but present with a menu that the different countries and different stakeholders can choose from. So the ISN does it through its major programs, and the major programs can be grouped into three categories. It bridges the gaps of available care through advocacy and collaboration with our global partners. And this is one such example of coming together and writing this book. It also helps build capacity in healthcare professionals. And when I say healthcare professionals, I don't only mean nephrologists, but all categories of healthcare professionals. For example, nurses, frontline healthcare workers, technicians, but also our other colleagues, for example, pathologists, surgeons, etc. Through its granting programs, for example, the fellowship program, the sister center program, its education program via the ISN Academy, and its research. It doesn't do research directly, but it supports research around the world. And finally, the ISN believes in connecting our community, and the mission for that is to develop a stronger understanding of the management of kidney disease so that we can make equitable kidney care available around the world. As I said before, we are just coming out of the World Kidney Day, and there are many parts of the world where those celebrations are going on even today. World Kidney Day mission is an ongoing mission, but the theme for this year was living well with kidney disease. So it was a patient-centered mission this year and patient-centered theme. And we hope that all our solutions that we develop have the patient in its center, and we continue to work together. I'm going to end here with once again congratulating all the editors and all the authors of this book. And I hope that we will have a vigorous discussion this evening my time, this morning in Brazil. And I look forward to hearing most of you.
Thank you very much, Vivek, for providing a worldwide view of the ISM mission and the problems that we as nephrologists face in different countries and continents. It's my pleasure now to invite Dr. Norberto Perico from the Mario Negri Institute of Pharmacological Research in Italy to present the second part of this session of Trends in Nephrology Worldwide. So he'll be presenting the theme, Should COVID-19 Concern Nephrologists? Please, Dr. Perico.
Just a moment that I charge the slide. Tutto schermo. Okay. Okay. Just my talk is dealing with a current issue of COVID and kidney. Why nephrologists should consider COVID as their business? We know that this is one of the major problems in every place of the world today. This severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2, that is COVID, is rapidly spreading around the world from the late 2019 last year to today. And in the early March, we had more than 100 million cases with more than 2.5 million deaths. This is a real problems. And how COVID presents itself clinically, in large part, 80% of infected patients, COVID is, we can say, a mild disease involving essentially the upper airways and characterized by symptoms like flu, fever, dry cough. But in the remaining 20% of patients, this disease, this infectious became severe, and the patient developed atypical interstitial bilateral pneumonia and acute respiratory distress, and 10% of patients subsequently die. So it is a real problem for not a minor group of patients. What the SARS-CoV-2 does. SARS use, interestingly for us, the ACE2 receptor to enter the cells, and this attachment through the spike proteins occur to the ACE2 enzyme, thanks to the contribution also of the transmembrane protease serine 2. And there are, it's not just a matter of the role of the virus. There are accumulating evidence suggesting that the abnormal host immune response is causing, is playing a critical role in the progression of toward the severe form of the disease, more than the virus itself. And once the virus enters the cells, it can cause a direct cytotoxic effect, it's replicate, and as I mentioned before, the host may express a maladaptive immune response. They involve the T cells, the cytotoxic T cells go exhausted, and then we have also an effective B cell response. What this means? This means that the virus is only partially eliminated and persists a shedding of the virus through the time. This causes activation of macrophage and neutrophils. There is a massive release of cytokines, and at the end we have an hyper-inflammatory response that together with the fact that this causes an inflammatory response locally, there is also the fact that the virus binding to the endothelial cells can activate inflammation of the endothelial cells, activate the complement and promote activation of the coagulation cascade. So at the end, we have, in addition to the hyperinflammatory conditions, we have endothelial damage, a pro-thrombotic activities in the microenvironment. And what is interesting that is we know that endothelial cells are able to express the enzyme ACE2, and this suggests that the virus can directly infect the endothelium with a process of endothelitis that is characterized by cell dysfunction, slice, and death. And here you can see a picture of inside the endothelial cells. You have these particles that are remaining some viral inclusion bodies. So this is just in Italian, but you say why nephrologists should deal with the coronavirus, since we think that this disease is just mainly located involving the lung. The reason is that beside the lung, there are many extra pulmonary manifestation of the infectious of the COVID disease, and so as highlighted in this slide, if this author say in the Science recently that if people are not dying of lung failure, they are dying of renal failure. How the point is how the virus reach the kidney. We can say that we can hypothesize the SARS-CoV-2 can colonize through diffusion in the bloodstream. However, rarely this viral RNA is detected in the blood. And recently it has been hypothesized that macrophages can be infected by the virus, and they can act as Trojan horses to bring the virus and disseminate systemically. So he can reach the kidney. And we know from the past that the kidney can express ACE2 localized on the brush border mainly of the proximal tubule, but also in the glomeruli. And this implies that if there is ACE2 in the kidney, SARS-CoV, as we mentioned at the beginning, can bind to ACE2 and can damage the kidney cells. And this is a picture of post-mortem analysis of renal specimen in some COVID-19 patients. You can see that there are coronary virus-like particles, these red arrows. In the green are the spikes of the virus in the cytoplasm of proximal and in distal tubular cells. And there are also evidence from our group, like made by Moura-Neto, in which they've been able to demonstrate some ultrastructural evidence of this virus in the glomerular epithelium. However, we know that electron microscopy, light microscopy, and other immunochemistry analysis cannot conclusively ascertain whether the identified particles are actually SARS-CoV-2 or merely virus-like structures. Indeed, these particles may be similar to other cellular structures like clathrin-coated vesicles. So there has been a debate on this. However, I think that is impressive, the find that either in situ hybridization and immune fluorescence analysis of SARS-CoV protein have been able to document the presence of the virus SARS-CoV-2 in the glomerular podocytes and endothelial cells. And still more in the way of the localization of the virus inside is this interesting paper showing that soluble human recombinant ACE2 is able to inhibit in an organoid kidney, human organoid kidney, the infectious of the virus. You can see here the concentration-dependent decline of the infection of the cells according to the concentration of the human recombinant, soluble human recombinant ACE2. which are the pathologic features that the virus damage the kidney is documented by a series of autopsies analysis in which you can see degeneration of tubular cells, necrotic epithelium in the tubular lumen, activation of the complement component in the position on tubular cells, and some also important, there are coming evidence of microvascular thrombosis in the kidney and in the glomerular capillary. And this highlight what are the clinical evidence of the disease in the kidney. Most patients that are with COVID show abnormal kidney function in the presence of low-level proteinuria that may reflect tubular injury. In other cases, proteinuria is more abundant, contain albumin. This suggests glomerular impairment. And in general, the abnormal kidney function is expressed as acute kidney injury that despite initial evidence of low rate of acute kidney injury in this kind of patients, actually more recent evidence say that AKI affect over more than 20% of hospitalized COVID patients and more than 50% of patients in intensive care unit. And what is the pathogenesis of acute kidney injury in these patients? There are evidence of direct valvular kidney injury, as I mentioned before, but probably most of the damage is induced by a general indirect pathways of the kidney injury. We know that in this disease, we may have fever, vomiting, diarrhea, fluid loss, this causes volume depletion, and this may cause acute kidney injury. There are interesting evidence of the crosstalk between different organs, causing release of inflammatory cytokines, causing at the end hypotension, hypoperfusion, and again acute kidney injury. We should not forget the consequence of the mechanical ventilation of these patients that more severe patients needed, the use of nephrotoxic drug on the sepsis that often combine with this disease and all cause acute kidney injury. But another issue, most of people believe that the kidney involved in the disease is just for the acute kidney injury. Actually, there are growing evidence that patients with chronic kidney disease are at high risk for COVID infectious disease, COVID disease. And more important, as I highlight in this commentary of Nature Review Nephrology by Gansevoort, on a large database, it became evidence that CKD, especially in the severe form of CKD or dialysis patients and even transplant patients, they have at high risk of mortality for COVID. Interestingly, this is higher than the risk for patients with cardiovascular disease, hypertension, diabetes, and other conditions that we know. And this brings me to my conclusions of the fact that, as you can see here, the concept that is put forth by Richard Horton, of the editor of Lancet, that COVID is not a pandemic. COVID probably is a syndemic. So because it's combined two conditions, two categories of conditions, the disease itself, the respiratory, the COVID itself, but together an array of non-communicable disease like chronic disease. And this has implications for the long-term follow-up of COVID sequelae, which in most instances should be interpreted against the background of an array of non-communicable disease in social.
I'm having here a cappuccino in Brazil since it's early morning here. And this is your trademark of conveying some message in nephrology. So we are very eager to hear you and see your thoughts and views on the future of nephrology. You have 10 minutes. Welcome, Claudio.
So thank you very much, Miguel, and thank you all for attending. And I apologize because I mismatched the time zones. This happens frequently when you have several different webinars in these times. However, I first of all want to congratulate my co-chairman, José Divino and José Moura-Neto for the publication of this book, because I think it is something that was really needed, especially not for us, but for the future generation. We have lived, and when I mean we, I mean people like me. We lived in nephrology on the last 45 years. We have lived an interesting evolution of nephrology from few people passionate about this subspecialty of internal medicine. We have seen flourishing departments. We have seen flourishing schools of nephrology with many pioneers in different areas. And I would say that in the decade between 1980 and 1990, probably we have seen the peak of evolution and development of nephrology schools and departments. I think this was mainly driven by the evolution in technology, in dialysis, and also the possibility to finally make a very nice and detailed diagnosis with kidney biopsy and histopathological analysis. Coming to the subsequent decades, we have seen a progression towards different subspecialties and disciplines of nephrology, including genetics, including special pharmacological approach, and also the area that I particularly like, which is critical care nephrology. Now, the question is, we have seen in the last 10 years, however, a sort of decadence in the spirit of research in nephrology. And in different countries, we have seen nephrology becoming part of Department of Medicine, with dialysis becoming like a commodity, and peritoneal dialysis almost no research in the last 10 years, and very few important advances. And I think that this is partially due to a kind of, let's say, the fact that our very good fellows very often take other specialties, including intensive care, including cardiology, including infectious disease, including different specialties that seems to bring innovation and important, let's say, new knowledge that allow new areas of research and new areas of interest. I think that this is dangerous because the nephrologist is the last real internist in the world, is the last real internist in the hospital, is the person who knows about pathophysiology more than anybody else probably, and should continue this type of, let's say, mission that was carried out for many years by the nephrologist within the hospital. Now, we probably thought for many years that glomerulonephritis, that has been declared rare disease recently, could pay the bill of large hypertrophic nephrology departments. This is not the case. If we don't have an alliance with industry and development of new technologies, we may end up in a specialty that will be a kind of second class. This is my thought, and I am sure that many of you probably will not share this view, but I am trying to push the young fellows to create new areas of research and to push for new interest in different disciplines. The other thing is, inside the hospital, if we leave the vascular access to the vascular surgeon, if we leave the peritoneal catheter to the general surgeon, if we leave the lithotripsy and treatment of lithogenic syndromes and renal calculi to the urologist, if we leave hypertension to cardiologist, and if we leave dialysis to technicians, then we lose a lot of our power of knowledge in our specialty. And I think we should instead gain space, and space is gained specifically in areas where the contribution of the nephrologist can be crucial. Just look at the, for example, model we have.
Marcelo.
Just look at the model we have developed over the year that around the world is called Vicenza model, where basically all the critical illness concerning extracorporeal therapies in the septic patient, in the acute kidney injury, and in patient with liver failure is completely managed by the nephrologist. In Vicenza, this has been true because since the beginning, we wanted to develop a discipline called critical care nephrology that was basically assigned to nephrologists to take care of. The same can be true for cardiorenal syndromes. I think in hospitals we should do and should force the cardiologists to work together on a specific clinic for cardiorenal patients. And there are now more and more papers, and you may see that my mission in the last years was to publish the links between kidney and other organs. For example, lung and kidney, brain and kidney, liver and kidney, and so on. And I think that we cannot just let it go and keep only attention to our chronic patients, because chronicity not only is a pain on the neck for the healthcare systems, but also it implies that the maximum attention should be given to reduction of cost of the treatment of these patients rather than improving technology. So my advice is for young fellows, please study the mechanisms of dialysis and study the history. How did we arrive to today's technology? Technology was developed through a series of studies that you should know and learn in order to improve further. We expect from you guys, from younger guys, to further explore new avenues. We definitely have succeeded to keep patients alive in dialysis for years, but we're not satisfied. They are not so good. They are not doing well after 20, 30 years. So we need to improve this. Maybe we can improve biomaterials. We need to improve genetic phenotyping of the patient. We need to study more pharmacological approach combined with artificial organs. We need to study the physiology of the interaction between different artificial organs. We know about the organ crosstalk at the physiological level, but we need to learn about artificial organ crosstalk. We need to move towards portable device, wearable device, even implantable device, because mobility and freedom and de-hospitalization for our patient will be the future. And definitely, we need to follow the steps of the pioneers in histopathologic analysis in order to prevent with the pharmacological approach the fact that patients evolve towards what we call today endothelial to mesenchymal transition towards fibrosis and end-stage kidney disease. Finally, I would like also to recommend a refinement in diagnosis. For many years, we have diagnosed AKI with oliguria and creatinine. We need to use biomarkers. It doesn't pay to be skeptical about biomarkers. I know they cost more than creatinine, but in our hands, for example, biomarkers were able to reduce 20% of the patient going into continuous renal replacement therapy in the ICU. So if you diagnose early AKI, you may do something to prevent and protect further derangement in the kidney. You also may study the evolution of the acute kidney injury syndrome, trying to facilitate healing of the kidney and restoration of kidney function. And we have also to develop a post-AKI clinic, because many of our patients with AKI end up with loss of renal functional reserve. People just measure GFR, or they estimate GFR, but they have no clue that reduction in renal functional reserve may actually have lost more than 50% of the nephrons without an increase in serum creatinine. And this is an extremely important area of research. So we need to study more the native kidney, because we know something, but we don't know everything. We need to study more the artificial kidney, and we need to study more the interaction with other specialties, which include a kind of humanistic approach. Technology is not just the final, ultimate, and only solution. It is true that you can probably be helped by artificial intelligence in diagnosing early AKI or other disease, but artificial intelligence and information communication technology should not be a substitute for brain thinking. And believe me, young fellows should learn to talk to each other, to learn from each other, to listen to the pioneers, to listen to the older colleagues, to be collegial in the decisions, and possibly, sometimes, to have a little less internet and a little bit more cabinet, together with the friends sitting down in a couch and discussing about future plans of nephrology. Nephrology is an interesting discipline. It is a very high-tech specialty, but we are still taking care of the whole body and the whole patient. And the final recommendation for young fellows is that there is a difference between curing a disease and taking care of a patient. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudio. Fortunately, these sessions are being recorded, and I think that your message can be, spread around to the young nephrologists, the young physicians, as you mentioned. Thank you so much. I'll turn over back the chair to Dr. Suassuna. José?
Thank you, Miguel. It's now we are coming to another session, so I'll hand the session to José Moura and José Carolino for the major part of this book launch.
Hello again. Together with Carolino Divino, I'll be leading the session entitled A 360-Degree View of Nephrology Worldwide, a Local Perspective. So we will have short presentations. Out of 53 chapters, we choose 14, we only were able to choose only 14 chapters, but I believe soon we'll have another opportunities to hear from others. And so all speakers were instructed to keep the presentations beyond 10 minutes so we can have a more dynamic session. We won't have time for questions, but you are invited to take notes and send the questions after. So I'd like to first invite Professor Peter Blake. He's professor of medicine at Western University in Ontario, Canada. In addition to be a big football fan, Professor Peter Blake is co-editor of one of the most well-known books in medicine, the Traditional Handbook of Dialysis, and he has a very successful career in nephrology. Thanks for being here, Peter. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you for that introduction. Sorry, I'm just having a little problem with the screen here. With my slides, excuse me. Would someone else like to go first? I think I have a little problem here, and could I defer to someone to go first while I sort it out? This is going to take a minute or two. I didn't realize. Would that be possible?
Okay, I will. So I would like to invite Angela Wang to present nephrology in China. She's based in Hong Kong. She's professor at the University of Hong Kong. Some authors became friends in this process, and Professor Wang was one of them. In addition to be a very kind person, she has a very successful career in nephrology. She was involved in KDIGO, ISPG, ISN. She's a member of the editorial board of several top journals, and I'd like to invite her to talk about nephrology in China.
Hello. Hi, did you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
And did you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So good morning or good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, I would like to thank José Moura-Neto and José Divino, as well as Professor Ronco for the kind invitation for us to contribute to this book. And it's a great honor also to be selected and also be invited to tonight's presentation. And I'm presenting on behalf of our group. So as you can see, our chapter of nephrology in China is contributed by at least 20 authors from the book, and here outline just some of them. And some of them were actually very distinguished nephrologists from China and also past presidents of Chinese Society of Nephrology. We also have other contributing authors in this book chapter. And I would also like to acknowledge not just the contribution from all the authors in this chapter, but also to pay tribute to Professor Li Leishi and Professor Wang Haiyan for their landmark contributions to the development of nephrology in China, both in clinical and research development. So here is the China map. As you know, it is one of the world's most populous country with a population of around 1.4 billion. And it consists of 23 provinces as well as 5 autonomous regions and 2 special administrative regions. And one of them is where I'm located. The most populated urban areas are in Shanghai, Tianjin, Guangdong, Beijing, and Shenzhen and Chongqing. I think some of you may have been to all these places, so it would be nice to actually visit the country when the COVID is over. So as you can see with the GDP, in fact, China experienced a very remarkable growth in around 2010, and the average GDP was around 6.5%, and you can see that the GDP is actually still rising in the last few years. So just to introduce you that the remarkable development of China also relates to some of the development in terms of the registries, national registries for China by the Chinese Society of Nephrology. So these include the Chinese National Renal Data System in 2010, Hospital Quality Monitoring System in 2010, the China Organ Transplant Response System in 2013, as well as the Kidney Disease Network in 2014. Now, the remarkable development, as you can see, the CSN participants has actually grown from just dozens of people to now, when they established 40 years ago, to now over 10,000 participants in 2018. It's estimated that there are about 15,000 nephrologists in China. So in the section of CKD prevalence, Zhang Luxia has actually reviewed, I think, as we all know, there is the previous Lancet paper looking at China CKD prevalence. And overall, it is about 10.8% if you, with prevalence of CKD, defining both using the eGFR below 60 with the presence of albuminuria. But what I want to show you in this slide to highlight is there are regional differences in terms of the prevalence of CKD, in that the higher prevalence is observed in the middle region, the north region, and the southwest region of China compared to the other regions of China. And in fact, the prevalence is higher in the rural area than the urban area. So this is quite a busy slide, but perhaps I just want to show you one of the message, because they have these hospitalized patients, national registries in 2015. And what you can see, they compare the urban as well as rural area in terms of the proportion of different causes of CKD. And you can see these differences between the urban and the rural area. So rural area tend to have more glomerulonephritis as compared to the urban area. They see a greater percentage or proportion of diabetic nephropathy as the cause of kidney disease. And in fact, we have Zhang Minghui from Beijing. He actually also presented this in our book chapter, that is, there are changing spectrum of glomerular disease in China, because previously IgA nephropathy seems to be the leading cause of primary glomerular disease in China. But over the years, in fact, there is a slight decline. However, the idiopathic membranous nephropathy has actually increased almost twofold in the last 6 years. And that is partly attributed to the increased air pollution with the urbanization of the country, with the increased association between PM 2.5 with the incidence of membranous nephropathy. So this is an interesting feature in China. So the other key aspect that I would like to mention, but you may have to also refer to more detail in the book, is, as we know, there is a huge burden of non-communicable disease in China in terms of obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and also there is the aging population in China. So currently it's estimated that 110 million people in China is suffering from diabetes, and this section is covered by several distinguished nephrologists from China. And here in this slide, you can see this growing epidemic of obesity and diabetes in China. And also, Yu Xueqing and Zuo Li has actually worked on this section of the book, which is about the end-stage kidney disease data in China. As I mentioned earlier, there is about 15,000 nephrologists currently in China. And the incidence of end-stage kidney disease estimated in 2015 is about 112 per million population, which is age-adjusted. And if you include only dialysis population, the prevalence is about 402 per million population for hemodialysis and about 40 per million population for PD. By the end of 2017, it was estimated that there are a total of 610 million dialysis population, and of which you can see majority is the hemodialysis. But peritoneal dialysis patients is also growing in China, accounting for about 20% of the population, for the dialysis population. And in 2018, it's approaching 100,000 PD populations, including both APD and CAPD. In terms of kidney transplant, there is over 7,000 transplants per year. So this is one last slide to summarize the trend over the years since 2011 to 2017 in terms of the growing number of patients on hemodialysis as well as peritoneal dialysis. So Yu Xueqing actually has leads one of the biggest PD centers in China. And as you can see, although the number of PD centers have remained relatively static, not a big increase, but the number of PD nephrologists working in peritoneal dialysis has actually markedly grown in the last 10 years. In terms of kidney transplant, in fact, our current CSN President Chen Jianhua is actually working on the kidney transplants. And you can appreciate in the last 10 years, there is actually a growing number of these disease kidney donor transplantation, whereas the living donor transplant, as you can see, it doesn't seem to show the corresponding increase. Rather, there seems to be a rather static number of kidney transplants through live donors. If you looked at the overview of the top 20 provinces for the number of kidney transplants performed, you can see Guangdong, Hubei, Hunan, Beijing, and Shandong actually are the leading 5 provinces in China for the number of kidney transplants, and that contributed to the over 7,000 transplants for the whole country. I just want to have a brief word about the acute kidney injury in China, because this is actually another area that needs a lot more investigation and study. Because from a nationwide survey in China, it showed that only about 59% of the patients with AKI requiring renal replacement therapy received the required treatment. So this actually meant nearly 41% of patients with AKI didn't receive the support as required. If you estimate this data to the whole of China, that means an estimated of 339,000 patients who should receive RRT for their AKI didn't receive the required treatments. So essentially, these were more elderly subjects, men from lower socioeconomic areas, for local hospitals or with other malignancies and comorbidities. They were less likely to receive RRT. And furthermore, the other interesting finding is in terms of the CRRT, it was used in 54% of the AKI case, and also 38% used intermittent hemodialysis, and that's about 1% used PD. However, it was also noted that among a third of the people who received CRRT, in fact, they didn't really require the treatment, suggesting that the CRRT may actually be overutilized in some of the AKI situation. Now, we don't have enough time, so in the last part, I'm just going to briefly mention about the nephrology manpower in China. So it's estimated that the overall density of nephrology divisions in China average about 1.69 per million population. And it is about 8.46 to about 33.84 nephrologists per million population in Chinese mainland, assuming each division has about 520 nephrologists. So this estimation is actually higher than the 5.18 per million population in the ISN Global Kidney Health Atlas project. And in fact, it is actually surpassed the density of nephrologists in some other upper and middle income countries. However, it is important to take note that the nephrologist densities in China vary widely across different regions. They are more abundant in the more developed cities. However, they are still understaffed in areas that are less developed. So in fact, as you can see, more than 30% of the 100 top tier nephrology divisions in China, they are located in 3 major cities, which is in Shanghai, Beijing, and Guangdong. So other underdeveloped cities may be understaffed from nephrologists. So this is the distribution of the tertiary hospitals. And as you can see, only the tertiary hospitals will have the nephrology divisions. And clearly, there is a gap of care in areas like Southwest, Northeast, and Northwest China. But again, as I've alluded to earlier, these are although the areas where they have a higher prevalence of chronic kidney disease. So the last word is about the nephrology training in China. They usually, after the undergraduate 5 years, they would undergo a graduate medical education, either MD or PhD, before they underwent internal medicine training, and then the nephrologist training for another 1 to 2 years. And at the moment, they don't have this specialized examination for the nephrologist. So here, this is something that are currently underdeveloped. For the last word, I just want to briefly mention Hong Kong because it is functioning rather independently in terms of the renal service. Our incidence is about 172 per million population. The prevalence of treated end-stage kidney disease is about 1,364 per million population. We have the PD first policy. We also have a renal registry. And as you can see, currently we have over 10,000 subjects receiving renal replacement therapy, with about half of them on PD and 2,000 on hemodialysis, whereas the transplant is about 3,700. And diabetes remain the leading cause of end-stage kidney disease in our city, accounting 51%. So the last word is China and the CSN has really made very remarkable achievements in advancing nephrology in clinical and research development, as well as the development of national registries which enhance the understanding of the kidney disease and how we can advance care further, as well as clinical trials conduct. But clearly, with the rising incidence and prevalence of CKD, China still faces significant gaps in the nephrology workforce, as well as in other renal-related workforce, such as renal pathologists, dietitians, and other allied healthcare professionals. With this, I would like to thank the organizer and also thank the editors of this book and congratulations for developing such an amazing book. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angela. Is everything okay with Professor Peter Blake now?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, thank you. Angela, I believe you have to stop sharing your screen.
So, good morning, everybody. Sorry for the glitch. First of all, I would like to pay tribute to José Moura-Neto and also José Carolino Divino-Filho for putting this project together. I would also like to say I found Dr. Ronco's speech quite inspirational. I think nephrology is a wonderful specialty, and I think many of the points he made are very important. I'm very proud to be a nephrologist. I'm also pleased to be able to present on nephrology in Canada. One of the first things I'll say is that I was not born in Canada. I'm an immigrant to Canada. I came there 30 years ago. And sometimes I think it's a wonderful country. And sometimes it's easier for an immigrant to evaluate a healthcare system than for people who've lived in that country all their life. You have a sense of what you're comparing it with. So this is Canada. It's a country with 10 provinces, 3 territories, just under 38 million people. Most of you will know the bigger cities, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, and the federal capital in Ottawa. It's a fairly centralized country despite its large size. 40% of the people live in one province, the province of Ontario, where I live and where Toronto is. And if you add in Quebec, the French province, you have over 60% of people in 2 provinces. I would also like to point out that 4% of the Canadian population are First Nations. This is a very important point for many reasons, not least their high rate of kidney disease, which I will come back to. So a large country, but most people live in the south, close to the United States border. 60%, as I say, in 2 provinces. It's a high income country worldwide with a GDP over $50,000 US. English and French people founded the nation of Canada, but First Nations are a crucially important group who were there long before. And then it's a very multicultural country. 25% of people are not white, and 20%, like me, were born in another country. Politically, it's a very decentralized federation. People don't always appreciate this. The provinces have major powers. For example, relative to the United States, I think the provinces have much more power than the American states do. Healthcare, for example, is all funded and administered at provincial level. However, there is a federal Canada Health Act, which must be observed by the provinces. Our crucial supplemental cash transfers will not be given. And the Canada Health Act is crucially important to understand Canadian healthcare because it has this requirement that there be a single public funder for essential healthcare. This to me is unique almost in the world. I cannot think of, people say North Korea maybe also is the same, but only one public funder for essential healthcare. There is no private system apart from the public funded system for essential healthcare. In some ways, this is uniquely restrictive. Many people, many doctors I talk about from other countries think they could never work in such a country. But because everybody's in the same system, it forces a relatively high standard onto that system. Of course, rich people and influential people can get privilege within the system. Every system is like that, but I think it is unique. The implication for nephrology is there are no for-profit hospitals, no for-profit dialysis units, no dialysis chains or large dialysis organizations. Dialysis units are run by hospitals. Let me show you some numbers. 28,000 people on dialysis. We'll go through this in a little more detail. The incident rate of ESKD is over 200 per million. So not in the highest ranks in the world, but up above most European countries, but nothing like the United States or some of the countries in Asia with very high rates. Prevalent rate 1,350. If you just count dialysis, 810. And the mean survival is just over 4 years for a person starting dialysis. Transplant rate relatively high at 40 per million population, or 1,500 a year. Dialysis is delivered through a hub and spoke system. The hubs are large public not-for-profit hospitals. The spokes are satellite units, which are in smaller hospitals or in shopping malls or office blocks increasingly. The funding in 2 of the provinces, Ontario and BC, which is about half the population, is volume related and modality dependent. In the rest of the provinces, it's mainly by hospital global budgets, not tied to growth, but generously funded. The incident rates I've mentioned, they vary greatly by province. Provinces with a high population of First Nations, much higher rate. The approximate modality distribution across the country is 78% hemo, 18% PD, and 4% home hemo. But again, it varies by province. Briefly, hemodialysis, as I mentioned earlier, about 78%. It's typically about 3 to 4 hours each time, 3 times a week. About 10% of people are treated 4 times a week, typically for volume-related reasons. Urea kinetics are used. High flux dialyzers and not very much hemodiafiltration, a small amount of it only. Blood flows, which I heard mentioned earlier, typically 400 mils a minute. What's unusual, perhaps, in Canada is the decline of the fistula. Belief in the fistula as the first choice for patients has gradually died over the last 20 years. The majority of patients now in many of the provinces use a central venous catheter for definitive access. Patients don't want fistulas to a large extent, and patient choice has become very, very important. And most importantly, there's no sign of any effect on mortality rates. And bacteremia rates have become very low with the central catheters. And I think for most patients with an average survival of just a few years and an elderly age group, this probably works very well. Younger people, different issues, of course. I just want to pay tribute to a few Canadian nephrologists as I go along here. Claudio said, listen to your pioneers. And I was fortunate to work with this man when I first came to Canada, Robert Oldall. He died at a tragically young age. But this was the man who invented temporary subclavian dialysis catheterization, dual lumen dialysis catheters. He was one of the first to use those. And he pioneered slow nocturnal hemodialysis in the home, which has become increasingly popular in countries. Peritoneal dialysis is very big in Canada. About 18% of the patients, much more than that in 3 of the provinces. Recently increased because the governments and the provinces want more of it. Of course, it saves money. There is, however, no PD first. This is free modality choice. Good outcomes, superior to hemo, though you have to take into account the population is a bit younger, and when you adjust for that, it's not so much difference. 3/4 of them on cyclers, almost 3/4 on icodextrin. Very little use, in contrast to Europe, of biocompatible solutions, a lack of conviction that they're worth paying extra for. Quite a lot of incremental PD and quite a lot of assisted PD, especially in Ontario. And this, of course, is a pioneer in that area. I also had the privilege to work with this man, Demetrios Oriopoulos. Many people call him the father of CAPD, and he died 8 or 9 years ago now. Many of you knew this man. Home hemo, very popular, not as high as Australia or New Zealand, but pretty high at 4%. In British Columbia, 7 or 8%. It's a mix of short daily, slow nocturnal, and the old style 3 times a week. And some of the provinces have a dedicated funding bundle for it, which really helps. Transplant, high rate, top 10 countries in the world, not as good as Spain, the United States, or Netherlands, but in the next level, 4th or 5th in the world. 1/3 are living donors, 2/3 are deceased donors. Again, it varies greatly by province. British Columbia is first, Ontario second. Other provinces are not quite as strong. This is a very famous transplanter, John Dosseter, who I also had the privilege to know. He died last year. He carried out or organized, he was a nephrologist, not a surgeon, but the first living kidney donor transplant, twin to twin, McGill University in Montreal in 1958. Became a very famous ethicist in the second half of his career. There are 700 nephrologists about in Canada. A very high proportion are affiliated with academic centers. That was historically even more than half, but now it's about half as community nephrology has grown. There's a big swing towards more women in nephrology lately. About 1/3 are female. One nephrologist for every 50,000 people. So one for every 45 dialysis patients. Almost all nephrologists work with dialysis patients. Now, an interesting feature is that even though this is a public system, most doctors are paid fee for service by the province. And that's the case with nephrology as well. Some academic doctors are in alternative funding plans, but the majority are still fee for service, even in academia. And as a result, because dialysis is quite well remunerated, nephrology is therefore well paid. And as the population of people on dialysis keeps expanding, nephrologist income keeps high. It's the 3rd highest in internal medicine behind cardiology and GI. So it's due to fee for service. I hate to say it, but because of this, partly, and because I think it's a wonderful specialty, nephrology is popular. And unlike what we hear from the US and other countries, a lot of intelligent, excellent fellows are interested in nephrology. They do perceive that it's hard to get a job in nephrology. I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's true, but it is true perhaps if you want to be a community nephrologist in a big city like Toronto or Vancouver. There, it gets a bit hard to get a job. But if you're academically oriented, it's not difficult to get a job if you make any reasonable effort. And if you, and I think this works well for most people. So the specialty is popular. Almost all the nephrologists nowadays are trained in Canada. In the past, some of them, people like me, were trained in other countries first. The challenges, finally, for my last slide, to nephrology in Canada is a couple I'd like to mention. Hemodialysis capacity is always a pressure. It's growing at 2.5% annually. The government are tired of paying more and more money for more dialysis units. And there is a dilemma in the system. And I think it's relevant to what Claudio talked about earlier. Does Canada stay with public ownership, or should private partners, dialysis chains be brought into the system, or some combination of both? There's a lot of resistance to bringing in private dialysis providers because there is a feeling that some of the good things that I think we've kept in nephrology in Canada reflect the fact that it hasn't become corporatized to the extent that it has in many other countries. So I'm even, you know, I would not thought I'd have said this, but I lean towards favoring the present model continuing, and even for all its issues, keep it as it is. I want to mention what I said right at the beginning. The First Nations population are very disadvantaged in Canada, economically, socially, high rates of diabetes, particularly, and very high rates of diabetic kidney failure. And in some provinces, they make up 30% of the dialysis population, and they have 3 or 4 times the risk of reaching end-stage kidney disease as a white person in Canada. There are great efforts to improve prevention of kidney disease, but it's hard for many reasons I haven't time to go into here. Overall, the other biggest challenge is, of course, rising costs, because kidney failure is still getting more common, end-stage kidney failure, every year. It's not growing like it did 20 years ago when it was growing 5 or 6% a year, but it's growing at 2 to 2.5% a year. So again, thank you for this opportunity and for giving me the chance to present.
Thank you so much, Professor Blake. Carolino would like to call the next speaker.
Yeah, I'm just unmuting, and the next speaker is going to be Dr. Pedro Gois, one of those in the stories that I told in the highlights, going up from his country, Brazil, and now living, working, and growing as a nephrologist in Australia. He is working at the nephrology department of Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital, Brisbane, Australia. Pedro, welcome.
Thank you very much, Carolino, for the opportunity to be here. Thank you very much, Moura, for the invitation and the opportunity to contribute to this book and to be presenting today as well. I'm just trying to share my screen here. Yes, can everybody see my screen? Yes, yeah. Good, thank you. So I would like to first thank my colleagues and co-authors for the great contribution in this chapter. And I'm very happy to speak after Peter Blake because I think Australia shares a lot of common aspects with Canada, particularly with the First Nations. Here we have the Aboriginal people in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, as well as various aspects in nephrology as well. I'm an immigrant as well in Australia. I've started my medical career in Germany and then in Brazil. And since 2017, after my post-graduation in Brazil, I moved to Australia. And I will show some aspects of the nephrology in this country that I love. So Australia is a continental country. The global isolation, the low relief, and the aridity of the country are one of the most important and important characteristics of the land here. It explains its unique plant and animal life, but also the population being concentrated on the coastal areas. There are more than 300 different ancestries in Australia, and 28% of the resident population is born overseas. In the economic area, Australia has completed 28 consecutive years with economic growth. And this is one of the few economies in the world after the Second World War to achieve this steady growth. So in 2018, we had over 25 million people. Our GDP is somewhere around $1.2 trillion. The incidence of end-stage kidney disease is around 100 PMP. And the prevalence of end-stage kidney disease in 2017 was above 1,000 PMPs. Patients in dialysis in 2018, slightly above the 13,000 people. We have around 9% of the people receiving home hemodialysis. And above 2,000 patients receiving peritoneal dialysis. Australia does over 1,000 transplants per year, and I'll show in the next couple of slides some particulars from kidney transplant. But before, I will start with some milestones of nephrology in Australia, starting with the first hemodialysis in 1954 in the hospital I used to work, the Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital. We have prominent nephrologists ever since, starting with Dr. Kincaid Smith that was mentioned by Carolino before. We do have a registry, the Unstarter registry that started in 1971. That's a great asset for nephrology here. In the year 2000, we had the Cochrane Kidney Transplant Centre moving to Sydney as the editorial base. We have great programs in green nephrology. We have creatinine assays is standardized all over the country, and we have an acute kidney injury trials network running at the moment, contributing with clinical trials in nephrology. One recent just published in New England Journal of Medicine, that was the allopurinol used in chronic kidney disease. In addition to that, we did have some strategic plans in kidney disease implemented recently, and I'll show in the next couple of slides what we are intending to do, what is the goal for the next couple of years. So I'll start with AKI, and this is where I see the big difference compared to other countries, and particularly Brazil, USA, where in Australia, the vast majority of patients with severe AKI are managed by intensivists, by the ICU physicians and nurses. So nephrologists are consulted in less than 50% of those patients, particularly when they have chronic kidney disease, underlying AKI. In-hospital mortality is not different when this patient is under a nephrologist, or the nephrologist is consulting for that patient, as opposed to ICU physicians providing the full care in AKI. CRT is the preferred modality in the ICU, particularly CVV-HDF, and it's delivered by ICU nursing staff. It's followed by IHD whenever the patient is ready to be discharged from ICU and still requires dialysis. In that case, we are called by the ICU physicians, and the patient is handed over to us, and our nursing staff will perform dialysis. In the CKD and hemodialysis space, the prevalence is quite variable. It depends on gender, age. 4.5% of men under 45 years. And of course, it increased to about 40% in men over this, at the age of 74 years. Most people are unaware of the kidney disease. About 10%, 1 in 10 Australians have chronic kidney disease, and most of them don't know about their chronic kidney disease. There is a steady growth in prevalent hemodialysis. 49% of the patients on hemodialysis are elderly patients over the age of 65 years. Most patients dialyze for 4-5 hours for 3 times a week. I see the majority of the patients dialyzing 5 rather than 4 hours here. There is a trend for incremental hemodialysis as well, as Peter Blake mentioned, as well as for PD, incremental PD in Australia. In 2017, 32% of dialysis patients were receiving HDF, particularly in larger centers. In less likely elderly patients, there was a potential survival benefit with HDF, probably attributed to selection bias, difficult to separate what is the true effect of HDF in improving survival in dialysis patients in our population. There is universal access to dialysis for Australian residents and Australian citizens with Medicare card. Home therapies is something that we're really proud of. The overall home hemodialysis prevalence is around 11 to 12%. Here we go, home hemodialysis first, then PD, if the patients are eligible. If not, they go as in-center / satellite dialysis if they do dialysis at all. Of course, kidney supportive care is growing very fast. Here it's a trendy area in nephrology. I will leave this topic for a different conversation. So this is the second highest, home hemodialysis, the second, 11% and 12% is the second highest in the world, following New Zealand. We do have the fifth highest utilization of PD in the world, and the treatment prevalence is 99 PNP. So approximately 2/3 of Australians on PD, they are receiving APD, and we are mastering PD in terms of outcomes. If you see here, comparing decades, the number of PD-related peritonitis has dropped significantly over the years. In kidney transplantation, the first kidney transplant here was performed in 1965. We're going with virtual cross-match live this year, probably in 2-3 months' time. We did perform over 800 transplants from deceased donor transplants in 2018. 1/3 of these patients were DCD, and 2/3 of these patients coming from DBD. So the mean age of deceased donors was 46.4 years, and the wait list is under 1,000 patients, with waiting time averaging 2.4 years for the most common blood type. This is a particular area that I would like to touch base today, is our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. They are one of the oldest cultures in the world. Kidney disease is very common among Indigenous Australians. The prevalence is around 450 versus the 100 for non-Indigenous patients. Indigenous women are 15 times more likely to develop end-stage kidney disease, and there is a multifactorial predisposition. So there are theories on reduced nephron numbers from fetal programming, from malnutrition during pregnancy, high prevalence of diabetes, a poor response to westernized diet, and therefore they are more propense to develop diabetes, therefore chronic kidney disease as a result of this. There is also some issues regarding access to healthcare, and there is a health gap with this population that we are looking forward to closing in the next couple of years. This is particularly seen in transplant, where 14% of the population on dialysis has Indigenous background, and only 3% of these people, only 3% of all transplants in Australia are happening in Indigenous Australians. So the highlights here, I would like to mention the big red kidney bus. This is from Victoria. There is a New South Wales version, which is a blue kidney bus. This is an initiative with funding from various institutions, particularly non-profit organizations such as the Rotary Club. Doing this, let's say, moving dialysis unit, and patients can book to have dialysis in caravan parks. Like a dialysis patient is looking forward to take a vacation, he will look at the website and see where the bus will be for this year, and he can plan to drive to that caravan park and stay there for a couple of weeks, and he can be dialyzed there. It's dialyzed by nursing staff. The doctor won't be on site, will be on call, and there will be a close connection with local hospitals to provide immediate care if a patient needs. We also have, and this will be a matter of a different talk next, which is the Green Nephrology Action Team with the Green Nephrology Program. They are currently mapping sustainable dialysis practices in Australia, and let's see what comes up from this survey. So in terms of practice, the training pathway is nationally accredited and regulated by the Australian Medical Council, both operating under the federal government. The pathway is usually 1 year internship, 3 years basic physician training with clinical and written examination, plus 3 years of advanced training in nephrology. There is no exam after completion of the advanced training in nephrology. There is a favorable domestic supply of nephrologists, which is a challenge in terms of post-training employment. The salary in the public sector for around 40 hours per week is around 300,000 Australian dollars. What are the future perspectives here? There is a huge investment in early detection and management of CKD, particularly engaging primary care physicians. And this is a program that I was involved training primary care physicians in early recognition and management of CKD. There is a huge integration with the palliative care team, particularly with the kidney supported care team for patients on a non-dialytic pathway. There is increasing accessibility, renal care closer to home, decentralization of services, particularly with the utilization of telehealth, and a shift towards less inpatient activity and more outpatient activity and more PD and more home hemodialysis. Increasing in renal transplantation, obviously, is the goal for most countries, if not all countries in the world. And we're looking at closing the gap in healthcare for indigenous populations, as I mentioned before. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much again for the invitation. And I would like to thank again my co-authors for the outstanding contribution in this chapter.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Was an excellent presentation, an overview of Australia, which is difficult to be made in 10 minutes, but you were fantastic. So I would like to, before I invite the next speaker, Moura-Neto, you give me the license to make one comment here, one remark. There is one person in this room, I saw this person, who is a vascular surgeon from Grozny. If everybody knows where Grozny is the capital of Chechnya. I spent 2 days there 5 years ago, and they had 100 patients on hemodialysis in one center with no central dialysis catheter. All fistulas made by this doctor. So I just want to say it's a privilege to have you here today. Islam Israilov is his name. Thank you very much. And then we'll go to the next one, my dear friend Piergiorgio Messa from Ospedale Maggiore Policlinica Milano, and the ingoing president of SIN, the Italian Society of Nephrology. Please, Piergiorgio.
Carolino, I think I was informed that Professor Messa is not present. I think that you should call Professor Lewington.
I'll call then Professor Andrew Lewington from Leeds, St. James University Hospital in Leeds. And he must be very happy with Leeds team playing as they have been playing in the championship. So welcome, Andrew.
Thank you very much. Okay, I brought my talk up, but I didn't put my screen on, so I'm not sure if I can get back in so you can see me, but hopefully you can hear me all right. Can you hear me all right, Moura-Neto?
Yes,
good, lovely.
I can hear you very well.
Thank you. So thank you ever so much for the invitation to contribute to this book. It's fabulous, and also to speak today. I see there's about 120 different people on the meeting, so it's fantastic to have so many people listening and talking about what we love to talk about. Sorry, something's just, co-host has asked me to start my video. Start my video. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Excellent. That's better. You can see me now. I'm not that sure that's an advantage or not. Anyway, so my name is Andy Lewington, and I'm a nephrologist in the north of England in Leeds. And if I bring my next slide up, let me just bring this across here. There we go. So this is the United Kingdom. It's a map of the UK, a little bit isolated from Europe, as you well know at the moment. That's something that does bother me a little bit going forward, but we continue to care for our patients nevertheless. We can see the Union Jack over the top there and the different flags of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. We have a population of around 67 million, and the capitals of the four main nations are London, Edinburgh in Scotland, Cardiff in Wales and Belfast in Northern Ireland. We're very fortunate. We have the NHS, and that was formed in 1948. And that's something that we've come to rely on in terms of the great care we provide for patients, and that includes patients with kidney disease. And also it's been a great strength for us during the pandemic in the way that we've been able to provide the vaccination program and made our way through with that. So I think a lot of people have started to realize even more the importance of the NHS in terms of the care that it can provide. There are 84 nephrology units across the United Kingdom. 71 of these are adult, and 13 of these are actually pediatric. So just looking at kidney disease and injury in the UK, there's about 3 million people we estimate in the UK who have chronic kidney disease. And we know it's a silent disease, and many people don't even know that they have got it. It's something that's measured when a person goes to see the GP for a health check or some other reason that we find out that a person has, sadly, chronic kidney disease. We think the prevalence is about 15% in England. The most common cause of chronic kidney disease in the UK now is diabetes. And again, we've seen this theme running through, and it's a global theme, really. In our own community, we see that we have a 5-time increase in risk of developing chronic kidney disease amongst people of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities. And it's something that we're really working hard to try and understand and address. We have a lot of guidelines that we produce through our professional societies, and also we have NICE. So NICE is very influential. It stands separate from government, and we produce a number of guidelines around various diseases, and that brings the importance of the kidney disease to the larger community. So this was a guideline that was published back in 2014 on chronic kidney disease, and then updated in 2015. And then what we did during the pandemic, we produced rapid guidelines updating to try and get the message across to the community about the importance of chronic kidney disease and the risk that patients had of getting severe COVID-19. Just looking at acute kidney injury. It was back in 2009 now that the NC-POD, Adding Insult to Injury, Acute Kidney Injury Report was published. And this was something that really changed what we did in the UK. It demonstrated that it looked at patients who essentially died with a diagnosis of acute kidney injury. So this is the worst spectrum, patients who actually died with the condition. And less than 50% of these patients received good care. 43% of patients develop acute kidney injury after admission. And this wasn't picked up soon. And there were a whole host of other things that we realized we had to improve. But this was debated in the Houses of Parliament, and new systems were put in place to try and improve this across the UK. This has culminated more recently in the production of a report by the UK Renal Registry, the AKI report, in 2020, in June 2020. And this looked at the number of patients who had an acute kidney injury episode in England in 2018. And this was based on an electronic AKI alert. So this isn't perfect. It doesn't pick up every patient with acute kidney injury, and it may overcall in some patients as well. But the majority of hospitals now across certainly England have an alert system in there, and they send their data through to the UK Renal Registry for them to look at the data. 33% of people developed acute kidney injury during the hospital admission. 20% of all people with AKI died within 1 month of the first alert. And there was a major variation in acute kidney injury episodes across England. The risk of death was higher in patients, again, of lower socioeconomic status. In terms of kidney failure and kidney replacement therapy, the incidence of kidney failure in the UK is around 121 per million population. We have about 25,000 patients who are on hemodialysis, and we have about 1,000 pediatric patients on dialysis. PD is a much smaller modality in comparison to hemodialysis, with around 3,500 patients on it. We have roughly about 35,000 patients with a functioning kidney transplant, and we perform about 3,500 kidney transplants every year in the UK. And where I come from in Leeds, we do about 200 kidney transplants a year. On the 11th of September 2019, a new national kidney offering scheme was introduced, which is going to be an opt-out system. We hope this will try and take forward our numbers so we can bridge the gap, close the gap between those who get a transplant and those waiting on the transplant list. There are more than 750 consultant nephrologists in the UK, and this sort of works out as roughly 8.5 nephrologists per million population. So it's not the worst, but it's not necessarily the best when we compare it with other specialties in the UK. You need to be registered with the General Medical Council, and more than half of the nephrologists contribute to internal medicine. A newly appointed consultant will have a salary and commencing around £80,000 per year, which can rise to a maximum of around £108,000 after 19 years of service with the NHS. In terms of patient care, it's truly multi-professional in the UK. We have dedicated renal units. I know when I trained in the States and I did my fellowship at WashU, we didn't have set wards where patients had kidney disease. The patients with kidney disease were scattered throughout the hospital. We'd have to go and visit them and bring them back to a dialysis unit. And I don't know how other people practice, but in their countries, but certainly in the UK, we have dedicated renal wards where we keep and care for our patients who have all forms of kidney disease. And our multi-professional team looks after them whilst they're on the wards, but also in the outpatients. And there's an increasing need for us to have other people working with us to care for our patients, as we just don't have enough doctors. So we've got an increasing number of nurse specialists, physician associates that are being trained to try and support and create a framework around our patients. So we have nephrologists, we have trainees, we have immunologists, I haven't put there, but histopathologists, and please forgive me if I've missed any particular group out. Specialist nurses in dialysis, transplantation, low clearance clinics, advanced care practitioners, physician associates, dietitians, pharmacists, and psychologists. So it's truly multi-professional in terms of the care that we provide for our patients. The patient voice is very strong in the UK, and we started to work, we have been working very closely with our patients for many years. And there are a number of different groups, charities, national and local. And we have a few of them here, Kidney Care UK. They provide wonderful resources for patients with kidney disease. We have the National Kidney Federation, we have the Polycystic Kidney Disease Charity, we have Kidney Wales, we have Kidney Kids Scotland, Northern Ireland Kidney Patients Association, and they play an absolutely crucial role in supporting patients and shaping the services. They've been very good at lobbying for kidney disease. Kidney disease is very small beer compared to many of the other conditions in the UK, oncology, cardiovascular, and so on. We're often on the coattails of the other specialties, and we need to work very hard to raise the voice of the patient. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the patient groups lobbied very hard with the government to recognize the importance of kidney disease as a risk factor for severe COVID-19, and changes were made, and the patients with kidney disease were now recognized as in the clinically severely vulnerable group of patients. We have a number of professional societies. The Renal Association is one of the oldest societies, formed in the 1950s. The UK Renal Registry was set up 95-96 and sits with the Renal Association. And what they've done over the years is they've been fantastic at collating all the data from the UK nephrology units with the aim of improving patient care. A lot of the data feeds into the guideline groups. If you go to the website, you'll see a whole range of different guidelines. And these guidelines themselves are accredited by NICE. So they're very high level quality guidelines that are produced that inform the government of what patients require. The British Association of Paediatric Nephrology was formed in 1973, the Scottish Renal Association 1991, and the British Renal Society, which is a truly multi-professional society as opposed to the Renal Association, in 2001. And I think in reflection of the way that we've been moving in the UK in terms of working with our patients and the multi-professional care that we provide, there was a vote for membership of the British Renal Society and the Renal Association, which has come to the decision the two societies and association will join and will be called the UK Kidney Association going forward. And I think we can build and utilize the strengths from all the different members of the different societies going forward. What about kidney research in the UK? Well, like many countries, it's underfunded. And I think an interesting exercise is to see what the cost of kidney disease is to a country compared to how much is spent on research itself. That's quite a tough exercise to pull off, I think, but it's something we're very interested in doing in the UK. So again, we can try and lobby for more money towards research. Kidney Research UK is the main research charity in the UK, and I'm very privileged to work with them, and I'm co-chair of the grants committee and sit on their research strategy group. And they're a wonderful charity in terms of what they try and do for patients. It's very much patient orientated, and the grant system now, as it comes through, it's not just marked by academics. The patients look at those grants and they determine whether it fits with the aims and objectives of the charity. And I think that's a great thing to do. There are a number of many local charities as well. Kidney Research Yorkshire is the local charity in the area where I am, and they've been very supportive in giving sums of money to pump prime research. Kidney Research UK has collaborated with the Renal Association previously and set up the UK Kidney Research Consortium in 2007. And the aim of this was to set up a number of clinical study groups whereby you'd have experts in AKI, GN, CKD, kidney transplantation, to drive forward clinical research into kidney disease. The NHR set up medtech in vitro diagnostic cooperatives, and we're blessed in Leeds in having the only one that has a renal theme. And this supports the diagnostic companies in the design and validation of new intravenous diagnostics. So finishing off, what are the future challenges of for UK nephrology? Well, I think it's very similar to what I've heard already, and I think these are germane to all of us. Prevent kidney disease and injury, slow the progression of chronic kidney disease in native and transplant kidneys, increase the number of kidney transplants and the number of patients who are able to have home therapies and give them more autonomy, increase and maintain trainee recruitment in some areas, and we need to move forward with addressing issues around equality, diversity and academic attainment. This is something that all universities are looking very carefully at the moment. And of course, with COVID-19, it has really accelerated the digital transformation that's around us. But we need to be sure that people can access this. We need to be sure that people can access the platforms and to make sure there's the correct infrastructure for everyone to reap the benefits of what we now have available to us, such as the events that we have on today. We need to address health inequalities, and we need to lobby for a larger share of the research funding for kidneys, because if I look at conditions such as oncology, the investment, the oncology didn't have such great treatments a number of years ago, but the amount of money that's gone into oncology, the stratification of cancer has led to so many different diagnostics and therapies. I think if we could get a share of that sort of money to look at kidneys, we may well be able to push forward in our better understanding of kidney disease and develop new therapies and diagnostics for our patients. And I'd like to finish off there and say thank you to everyone for listening, and let's keep talking about kidneys. We've been thinking about them. Let's start talking about them now a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for this very clear and overview of nephrology in the UK. We would like now to, José Moura, to call on Piergiorgio Messa.
I believe Piergiorgio Messa is not present. He won't be able to join us. I believe, so I will call the next one, okay?
Okay, fine.
Okay, so I have the honor to invite one of the living legends of nephrology, Professor Bernard Cano, to lecture on nephrology in France. He's emeritus professor of nephrology at Montpellier University, has published several impactful papers over the past years, and I'm very glad to have him on the book, on the events, and also as a friend and as a mentor. Please, Bernard, thanks for being here today. You have 10 minutes. We are not hearing you.
Yeah. Okay. Could you see my screen?
Now it's okay.
You see the screen. Okay, so thank you very much for the kind invitation, and of course, very happy to share this, I would say, few facts on the nephrology in France, and very pleased to see a lot of people, good friends, and I really appreciated the thought of Claudio Ronco, but this is a privilege of the age. I'm a little bit more optimistic than him.
Professor, you are mute. And your screen, I believe that it's small. You can.
Okay, I will do. Is it okay now?
We are listening to you, but the screen. Oh, now it's okay. Now it's fine.
Okay. Let me know because I have some technical issue. Okay, so thank you for the kind invitation and congratulations for the three, I would say, names who put this in perspective for the nephrology in the worldwide. So my task is to talk about the nephrology in France, and I will share some facts. I don't want to go any, I would say, on the general data because this is not really the interesting point. The 67 million of inhabitants and so on and so on. You can find this type of information in the book. I will focus a little bit more on, I would say, some specificity of the country and particularly on CKD management. As you know, France is part of the western part of Europe. This is one aspect, but we have what we call overseas territories, and this is widespread around the globe. And as you will see in a minute, epidemiology of kidney disease is completely different from what we call metropolitan or mainland France and what we observe in overseas territory. I will show some information on this topic, but I would say the incidence and type of I would say kidney disease is almost completely different from this, I would say, overseas territory. Okay, so this is a part of the, I would say, metropolitan area. I don't want to go into detail, depending on the density of the population you see based on the colors. And on the left side, you see overseas territory, and sometimes they get almost 10,000 kilometers apart from the mainland, meaning that we get, I would say, some complexity to manage this patient. The good point, and this is just to remind you that nephrology, the International Society of Nephrology, was born in 1960. This is the pictures from Evian, and you are not able to see the people on this slide, but if you look really carefully, you will see Belding, Swimler, Jean Hamburger, John Merrill, and all the guys who were the fathers of the nephrology, and really proud to see these pictures. As you maybe realize, nephrology in France is a highly regulated system. I don't want to go into detail, but highly regulated, I will show you in a minute, meaning that we have so many agencies, board, professional union, and so on and so on. Everything is connected to the Ministry of Health or the Ministry of Education. Now, what maybe is attractive from the nephrology perspective is, of course, as a nephrologist, you have different options. And this is, of course, care on the left side, where you can put your, I would say, exercise and practices in different places, public, non-public, and private, I would say, system. You can be part of the teaching training system from the university. And there are a lot of labs connected to the nephrology, INSERM, CNRS, different, I would say. And this provides to the nephrologist tremendous opportunity to exercise in a different, I would say, type of activity. Now, and that's part of the training. Nephrology training for the professional development, I don't want to go into detail, but it's from the starting point to the end of the nephrology. this is almost 11 to 12 years with a different, I would say, exam, with intern fellowship, with a different type of, I would say, training, different position in the hospital. I don't want to go into detail. And then based on these specialties, you have three options. One is a private exercise where you can do nephrology, and I will show you in a minute, you can have your own clinics. Academic, positioning, so meaning, I would say, part of the academic hospital or teaching hospital, and then public hospital. So three options to put your training and your exercise in this, I would say, nephrology training. This is the demography of nephrologists, and as we heard this in the introduction, nephrology is a nice, I would say, specialty in France, and the growth rate is about 3.6% per year. So we did not observe any shortfall for the, I would say, or shortage of the physician. It's even the second or third ranking choice for the young nephrologist, for the young physician. Maybe we can talk about this element later. Now, mean age is about 48 years old, as you see from the female and the male, and it's almost 57% for the male and 43% for the female, meaning that we move on sort of new topics, which is now feminization of the specialties. Now, if you look on nephrology practices, 2/3 or 60% is on the hospital base, but meaning that 1/3 is on non-hospital base, so meaning private or mixed between private and I would say public system or non-hospital practices. So, but it's a sort of mix between the public and non-public system, meaning that we have a lot of interaction, certainly interesting for this, I would say, exchange. Distribution of the nephrologists in university teaching hospital, as you see, is not tremendous numbers, but you have here a mix of, I would say, from professor to different practitioner. This is mostly exercising in the university teaching hospital. Now, if you look at the density of the nephrologists per region, the average is 2.3 nephrologists per 100,000 inhabitants. So altogether, we have 1,672 nephrologists with a sort of repartition. And you see if the map, looking on the map, of course, you have a lot of discrepancy depending where you are living, with high density of nephrologists, or I would say lower density, depending if you are south. Certainly, this is a little bit more attractive. Kidney care, in the context of French healthcare system, it's highly regulated. I don't want to go into detail, but as you see from the left side to the right side, so many health ministry, interior ministry, research, industry, educational ministry. So you have different, I would say, interconnection. And of course, on the local or regional, this is what we call regional agency, who are taking care about hospital, clinic, outpatient in a different region. So all regions get their own, I would say, agency, but everything is reporting to the health ministry. Now, this is certainly the most interesting, I would say, slide of my presentation. This is the turnover per year, and this is the turnover in 2018. As you see, the new patient entering, it's on the top, so meaning, I would say, entering to dialysis is almost 11,000. Entering immediately by transplant is 464. Patient dying, unfortunately, you get 7,000 from dialysis, 950 from transplant. And there is a lot of, I would say, interaction between non-dialysis to transplant or vice versa, coming back from transplantation to dialysis, meaning at the end, new patient entering in the end-stage kidney disease per year in 2018, but still the same, is 11,000. Altogether, I would say end-stage kidney disease treated by dialysis or transplant is almost 90,000 patients. I will show you in a minute. And transplant rate per year is 3,500. Death rate is 8,600. this is the cause of the kidney disease, and you will be impressed to see that diabetics is not the first cause of the kidney disease in France. The first cause is hypertensive and vascular disease because of the age. Age of starting dialysis is 70 years old. Diabetics is only the second cause. Now, if you put the diabetes as a sort of comorbid condition, we can get 30 to 35% of the patient with diabetic, but still it's growing. It was not the case 10 years ago, so we observe sort of a change. And other disease, glomerulonephritis, polycystic kidney disease, and so on, but the vast majority is hypertensive. Now, if we look on the incidence, and this is for men and women, as you can see, 7,000 patients start dialysis in 2018. I would say for the men, and half from the women's side. So that means it's very impressive to see that the ratio is about 50% less for the female as compared to the men. What we observe also in the incidence rate is, of course, tremendous increase of the age. This is on the men on the top, and this is for the women on the bottom part. So you see that population is clearly close to 75, more than 75. The young patients are not really on dialysis. I will show you in a minute that maybe are transferred. Trends over the time, it's still increasing. The standardized incidence is increasing for the men and for the women, as shown on this slide. And again, the incidence of new patients starting has tremendous regional variation, as shown on this slide. According to the color, you see if you are living in the center or north or east part of France, you get a little bit more exposed to end-stage kidney disease, and also overseas territories, as shown on the slide, has a tremendous incidence of this end-stage kidney disease. Age, but this is age for the total population. Dialysis and transplant, as you can see, is 63 years old, mean age. But I would say transplant is 50, and dialysis patient is 73. So that means this is average, not reflecting what we observe in the dialysis population. Standardized prevalence, so moving from incident to prevalent, as shown on this slide, the woman and the men. This is also, I would say, just highlighting that majority of patients in dialysis get very old, and certainly more than 2/3 of the patients get over 75 years old. The prevalence of the treated end-stage kidney disease by treatment modality. So this is total population in 2018, 46,000. In hemodialysis, PD is at 2009, almost 3,000, and kidney transplant is 40,000. So that means at the end, we get almost 40% on the patient who are transplanted and 60% on the patient on form of renal replacement therapy by dialysis. The prevalence of the treated end-stage kidney disease by treatment modality, again, this is, I would say, 86 per million population. PD is low, is a 44, as compared to transplant, which are 600 per million population. So you get almost, I would say, a nicely distribution between dialysis and transplant. The functioning kidney graft in 2018 was 40,000. So that means it's a large number, and we are trying to increase living donors, meaning that almost 88% of the patients receive, I would say, this is donor transplant, but this is a tremendous increase now to push on a living donors transplantation. Person distribution according to dialysis modality, and this is also for the incident population. So now after 90 days, because we make rules selecting the patient after 3 months to make sure that the patient are stabilized, you see that in center is 70% almost, satellite unit is 12%, self-care or MIMO 8.4%, and PD is 10.9%. So if you put all together the self-care or MIMO plus PD, we are close to about 18%. So the target for the Ministry of Health is to get 25%. According to the techniques, and that's interesting from the hemodialysis and I would say all the form of dialysis population, 40,000 patients. Conventional high flux is 64%. I don't want to talk about hemofiltration, almost gone, or biofiltration, but see, hemodiafiltration is now 35%, and daily OM is close to 1%. So this is an increase that we observe over the time. Still, the majority of patients get treated in center. What is also specific from France, chronic kidney disease is completely covered by, I would say, the social security system, so the patient get full coverage. So what we call the list of 30 chronic disease, and the chronic kidney disease is the number 19. So that means based on this system, everything is provided free for the patient, for the consultation, lab test, medication, nursing care, transportation, dialysis, and physical rehabilitation, and all this stuff. So that means universal access and full coverage for the patient. What is the cost? And this is a cost was calculated a few years ago. According to kidney transplant, CAPD, or MIMO, different setting, and it's clear that per year, the highest cost is in center. We estimate that the cost per month, this is not per year, it's 7,000 euro per month, as compared to, I would say, EMO, and as you can see, EMO is 4,000, 4,005, so that means 40% less. And this is why health authorities are pushing very hard to increase treatment. So what are the future perspectives? And this is, of course, to sensitize the general population and non-specialized guys on the burden of renal disease to make sure that we can anticipate and make, I would say, prevention. Strengthen the training of doctors, and particularly focusing on the trajectory of the patient to facilitate, I would say, transition care between, I would say, CKD and dialysis, and from dialysis to transplant or vice versa. And improving the efficiency of the care, so better management, and this is part of what I said, trajectory management. The health authority are focusing on the trajectory, detect kidney disease earlier, promote therapeutic alternative to in-center, empowering the patient, treating the patient with less medicalized structures and particularly safe care, increase the number of kidney transplants from either cadaveric form or living donors, as I mentioned to you a few minutes ago. And then also, this is a new part of the plan, use new information and communication technology to improve the quality of reserve, developing, I would say, risk predictive modeling, develop model of health and decision support, telemedicine, teledialysis, all the system, and review, that's the currently part of the activity, review the model of care and its funding to move on more, I would say, result-based and not really, I would say, activity. So it's a payment for performance more than, I would say, payment for activity. This is what the Ministry of Health is trying to develop. And then I just want to thank you for your patience with my presentation. Thank you very much.
Bernard,
yeah,
I just wanted to mention that I didn't want to be pessimistic. I simply wanted to give a stimulating message for the young fellows.
No, you are right. You are right. But you know, the administrative pressure and the, I would say, precaution principle that we have to apply, this is almost a disaster. But this is not the motivation of the young fellow.
Thank you, Professor Bernard Cano. Now I would like to call José Divino to call the next speaker.
All right. Thank you, Moura. So the next speaker is Belén Marrón from Spain. I have known Belén for 20 years. And if there is a doctor who any patient would love to have as her or his doctor, this is Belém. If there is a colleague that anybody would like to have as a colleague, this is Belém. And if there is an employer who is smart, would never let her go. So Belém, welcome.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me, just in case?
Yes. You have to click on the first slide.
1 second.
Belém, we are, yes, I believe that now it will be fine.
Okay, because I see the slide, but quite small.
We are seeing your commenters.
Let me see. Okay, that's fine. First of all, I would like to say thanks to the editors for the chance to have Spain in this interesting project, and very honored to represent my country. I would like to acknowledge all the co-authors that they are standing in each section. And also, I would like to acknowledge all the ones who have contributed to the past and present of Spanish nephrology, as well as those who may impact its future. Important to note about Spain, we are a country in Western Europe, Mediterranean area, with a population close to 47 million. We are distributed in 17 regions called autonomous communities, and we deal with several co-languages. There's one factor that affects the organization, and it's the elderly population. We are expected to have the world's longest life expectancy by 2040, and at that time, chronic kidney disease will be the second cause of death in those decades. Regarding epidemiological data, we will see it later in one slide, but the incidence and the prevalence is in the average of European numbers, with a median survival in all modalities of 6.5 years. And what is more striking is that there's a continuous increase in incidence and prevalent patients. We have a universal free national health cover where all renal replacement therapies are available. There's no incentive for medical staff, regardless of the modality where patients are sent. We have a strong public sector. That means patients are mostly treated in the public sector, and so does the staff working at. We have a long history, and we may be world leaders in kidney transplantation. And much of what is Spanish today in terms of nephrology is thanks to these outstanding two nephrologists. They ran their career in parallel. Professor Luis Hernando in Madrid, in the hospital where we were trained, and Professor Rotellar in Barcelona. Whilst in Barcelona, they did the first kidney biopsy and the first functional kidney transplantation, Professor Hernando, who led the institution for 4 decades, he was able to set up what we know today as a nephrology department with all sections, with chronic programs, with research, and also did the embryo of what is today the Spanish Society of Nephrology, with at least 1,800 nephrologists. From Spain, nephrology went all over the country, but also to Latin America. And here is the structure of the health system. As I mentioned, universal national health system, but the health competencies are transferred to these 17 regions. We have this strong public sector with all modalities, but please bear in mind that 55% of patients ascribed to hemodialysis they are undergoing extra-hospital dialysis clinics that mostly belong to private providers and run by multinationals. Here is the slide regarding epidemiology with the key points. Once again, the elderly population is overrepresented. This means that every year, 60% of the patients who start dialysis, they are over 65 years of age, 30% over 75. Diabetic nephropathy is the main cause to undertake a renal replacement therapy. Most patients start under hemodialysis, and we are very proud to say that nowadays 55% of the prevalent patients, they are already transplanted. In terms of annual cost, hemodialysis, especially in the hospital setting, is the most expensive, followed by PD, and the most efficient treatment is transplantation in terms of course and quality of life. Some highlights about hemodialysis. We were mentioning that this is the only modality that can be partially performed in the private sector. And these patients, they are in these extra hospital dialysis clinics, mostly under multinational private providers. At least there are 400 of these clinics all over the territory. The mean number of patients in these units is 72. The staff at least is one physician every 39 patients, one nurse every 4 to 5, and to work in the hospital in a nephrology department is a must to be a nephrologist. Most of the times there are nephrologists in the clinics, in these satellite clinics, but some people may be non-nephrologists. What other highlights we can say about hemodialysis? How is the treatments? How do we prescribe? I can say that we have what we say advanced therapies. And this is because more than 90% of the patients undergo more than 12 hours of treatment every week. We achieve good quality indicators and adequacy values, and all patients are under high flux hemodialysis or online hemodiafiltration. Actually, online hemodiafiltration is progressively increasing in the country, ranging from 30 to 90% of the hemodialysis patients, depending in regions. We use ultra-pure dialysis fluid, and all medications, including the calcium mimetics, are quite easily accessible for all patients. On the contrary, we deal with a big challenge with CVCs. Lots of CVCs at initiation and in prevalent. We have some home hemodialysis programs, but it's still limited. And we have some infant following hemodialysis in pediatric units, but they usually get a transplantation before the next 6 months of commencement. Some highlights about peritoneal dialysis. As another difference with other countries, as mentioned before, peritoneal dialysis can only be exclusively delivered in public hospital. And another difference with many other countries is that we don't have a single product buy-in, and we have a fixed daily therapy or cost. We have first PD programs in 1960, but real leaders in peritoneal dialysis have been Dr. Selgas and Dr. Coronel as our main principal pioneers. What is relevant to note is that we observed that there's a progressive increase in PD take-on, and it was 16% of new incident patients in 2019. And some reasons for it is the creation of the GATPE group, which is a group from the National Society of Nephrology to promote PD, aligned with the National Patients Association, the appearance of new health economic models that they see that PD is more sustainable in terms of cost constraint, the larger and wider use of decision-making aids for choice, and new setting up of cardiorenal programs. And in terms of treatments, I rather say again, quite advanced, because the low GDP solutions are universal bicarbonate solutions. Half of the patients are following automatic peritoneal dialysis, or they have icodextrin as well as a fluid. We have low peritonitis rates, and there's a huge new interest in the new IT connectivity systems. Nevertheless, transplantation through the National Transplant Organization is the cornerstone of all renal replacement modalities. This organization was created by Dr. So well-known Rafael Matessant in 1989, and this has been a model to be exported worldwide. We perform
Could you put your slide on full screen? I could barely see.
I tried before, but
where? Go and tell Louise, Lily has woken up. We better prepare milk for her.
Yeah, apparently you cannot place it. There's something.
Apparently, I have no icon to enlarge it. I was mentioning it at the first slide. Sorry for that.
That's all right. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Continue.
So we perform more than 3,300 new patients every year in transplantation. And they were first attempts in the 60s, but the legislation of 1979 brought big changes of something that is quite well known in Spain, that we as population, we are all donors if deceased, and if we didn't do any opposition when we were alive. So nowadays, all patients must be evaluated to undergo a waiting list. Records are beaten year by year. We have one of the lowest global declination rates for donors, and we have successful programs. One is the preemptive transplantation. More and more patients do get a transplant before being on dialysis. There are programs to optimize deceased donor donation, and we are increasing the number of living-related donors, being 10% in the last data, with a national cross-donation programs. We also have high survival graft rates, up to 15 years. So as take-home messages, we can say that in Spain, we have a history of 60 years. We deal with one of the longest life expectancies in the world, and this may be a constraint for the budget sustainability. We have a strong universal national public health system where all modalities are delivered and patients do not have to pay for the service. The dialysis schemes are very advanced. The National Transplant Organization is admired and awarded in Spain, but also internationally. But on the contrary, we have challenges. And one is the lack of interest in nephrology training. We have to do something to reduce the number of CVCs. We have more and more patients in the waiting list. In the last data, 84% of patients, regardless of so many transplants. A potential inequity, likely due to the 17 different competencies that we have in the country, and a mismatch between the high quality delivery of renal care and very limited health research structures with salaries that they are very far from the ones in countries with similar economies. So thanks to all of you and to all the Spanish nephrologists.
Muchas gracias, Belén. Excellent presentation. We really are happy. Thank you so much. Moura-Neto, you take it over.
Okay, thank you, Belén. I'd like to invite Professor José Suassuna talk on nephrology in Brazil. He's member of the National Academy of Medicine. He's scientific director of the Brazilian Society of Nephrology and full professor at the State University of Rio de Janeiro. Professor Suassuna, please, thank you not only for preparing this presentation, but also to help to prepare these events. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, the both Josés that are co-hosting this session, and good day to everyone again. My task now is to talk about nephrology in Brazil, and I would like to start by showing some demographic and human development data. Brazil, as everybody knows, is a very large upper middle income country. It is the world's 50th largest country by area and the 6th most populous, also being mostly urban these days. About 87% of the population is urban and mostly concentrated on the sea part of the country, or on the seaside of the country. It has a mixed population, mostly of European, Iberian, and African heritage. It's considered an emerging economy with a GDP that ranks among the 10 biggest economies in the world, but it hangs low in terms of Human Development Index. Our country, at the latest count, ranked 84th out of 108 countries in terms of the Human Development Index, and one of the most unequal countries in the world with a Gini coefficient of 53.9, that ranks the 8th worst out of 159 countries. And this is highlighted in this slide. Most of the population belongs to the classes C, D, and E. It expends about 66.3% of the GDP in education and has a literacy rate of about 93% of the population. These are very typical unequal scenes seen in countries with high Gini coefficients, and as I said, Brazil is no exception. It measures the difference between the income of the rich people and the poorest people in the country, and one can see the picture with the postcard view along with the favela view that characterizes most of the unequal countries. Healthcare in Brazil is too tired. The main provider is the public unified health system that provides free universal access and is fully financed by public resources. It has another minor system restricted to government employees for some categories, but majority of the country's citizens are covered by the UHS. There are private subsystems, often with tax benefit incentives, so it's partially public subsidized, and this is mostly composed of health plans and insurance, which are voluntary supplementary systems. The UHS and the private sector are not very integrated, and the coexistence is sometimes contentious. And this slide compares the main features of the two systems and provides a background for some of the data that I will be presenting later. So the UHS is free, covers all Brazilians, is financed by federal, state, and municipal taxes. It's the largest public health system in the world, and it's deemed to be flawed but fair. It's primary care based on family health, focus on the promotion of health. It has 35% of the country's hospital beds, and therefore is prone to queuing, overcrowding, and shortages. And the majority of university hospitals are covered by the UHS, but there are many small hospitals with poor access to technology. On the other side, the private sector is market-oriented. It covers about 25% of the population. It has many different models of coverage, employment-based, medicine groups, cooperatives. It's the second largest private health insurance market after the US. It's mostly hospital-based. Its focus is on the treatment of illness, and it contains 65% of the hospital beds, the majority of ICU beds, and more than half of the health expenditure. It provides access to advanced medical technology that usually lacks in the UHS, and most of the outpatient diagnosis and therapy procedures are done by the private sector. These are some nephrology and medical facts. Brazil spends a little less than 10% of its GDP in healthcare. The prevalence of chronic non-communicable disease is on the rise, and as a consequence, CKD is also on the rise. The main modality for renal replacement therapy is hemodialysis, with PD accounting for less than 10% of the dialysis provision. And the vast majority of dialysis procedures, as well as kidney transplants, are funded by the UHS. About 82% of all procedures have this source of financing. Some historical highlights. The first dialysis in LA was done in Sao Paulo in 1949 by the visionary Tito Ribeiro de Almeida. He made an artificial kidney after Gordon Murray's design from the Toronto General Hospital. And this is this careful records of all the patients that he treated over the years from 49 to 54. It was used on more than 100 dialysis procedures. Brazil was the recipient of some of the Kof-Briggen artificial kidneys that were sent to many destinations worldwide. And my hospital, Pedro in Rio de Janeiro, received one, as well Servidores in Rio de Janeiro, and the hospital Das Clínicas from the University of São Paulo. And this is the historical picture and testimony of those pioneering days. John Merrill here, and my former chief, Jamie Lundman, chief of nephrology, at the bedside when the kidney was put to service in 1956. This is a major tragedy that occurred in 1996, and where a number of patients, more than 60 patients, died as a consequence of water intoxication, the dialysis water intoxication by cyanobacteria from green algae. And after that, and along with other sanitary incidents, it was instrumental in setting up the national system of sanitary vigilance in 1999. So this is the original description of the episode. And this was followed by guidelines issued by this sanitary vigilance agency that dispose about water treatment, monitoring parameters, workforce distributions, and many other aspects of dialysis, and has been implemented across the whole country and is under yearly review by local agencies. So we have a very strict guideline that everybody must follow under the penalty of penalties if one fails to comply. These facts, along with the the establishing of the United Health System, allowed the Brazilian dialysis industry and the performance of the offering of dialysis to the country citizens to grow steadily over the years. We now have a little under 150,000 patients on dialysis. This is the latest data that was published just last week by the Brazilian Dialysis Census, and this is the estimated prevalence of patients on chronic dialysis per million population. Also over the years, we now reached 684 patients per million population. There is an equal distribution of this prevalence on the different regions of the country, the highest being the southeast region that covers Rio and Sao Paulo, and the lowest being in the north, where is the Amazon region. The main causes of end-stage chronic kidney disease in Brazil is hypertension, but diabetes is rapidly catching up and is expected to surpass hypertension in the next few years. Glomerular disease now accounts for a minority of these cases, and these are PKD as usual is about 4%. Most patients, as opposed to the high-income countries, concentrate on the mid-age, and in Brazil it's about almost 40% of the patients are between 45 and 64 years of age. Again, historical data, this was the first kidney transplant that was made in Brazil in 64, but the patient produced an immediate urinary output, but ultimately lost the function in the life after the second week due to rejection and infection. The first successful kidney transplant was performed a year later at Hospital das Clínicas in the University of São Paulo. Brazil has a very comprehensive bill of transplantation that was issued in 1997, and this is the first paragraph about the free disposal of tissues and organs and parts of the human body in life or post-mortem for the purposes of transplantation and treatment, and this was then permitted under the terms of the law. This provided the impetus for Brazil becoming one of the leading transplant countries in the world. In absolute numbers, we usually rank among the top 5, but in relative terms, when it's factored by the size of the population, Brazil still lags below the at the 32nd level, so there is much to improve to reach the majority of the population. This is the yearly activity and survival rates, and one can see the impact of last year's pandemic, still raging today. But that's
Professor.
Yeah.
Could you increase your slide because it's in presentation mode?
Okay, I'll switch that. Sure. There is a way to do that. Could have told me right from the beginning, but so what I'll do is just.
I believe that it won't compromise if you want to keep.
No, just a sec.
No, it's the same thing. I
believe it's the same thing.
You can keep going because it's.
Na parte superior direita, Suassuna, simula lá. Vai passando seu mouse um pouco mais à direita. Aí, ó, abaixo, do lado desse X.
Sorry for that. I believe I'll have to finish this way because I'm not being able to change the slide view. And I'm close. Let me just go back to where I was. No, it hasn't changed, has it?
No, it hasn't changed, but it's okay.
So this is the transplant activity in Brazil, and we have the survival rates as shown on the left-hand side, on the left part of the slide. This is how the nephrology workforce in Brazil. We have a demographic census of all practicing physicians in the country that is published regularly, and this is the latest publication in 2020. There were over 4,900 nephrologists, 4,900 nephrologists. That gives a rate of 2.3 per 100,000 population. It's the 23rd overall in terms of medical specialties, and the mean age is 47 years. There are about over 800 dialysis centers in the country, and there is even a rate of female and male doctors, so slight predominance of females most recently. It's interesting to know that nephrology is among the specialties with the higher number of 2 specialties, and more, as expected, many of the second specialty is usually internal medicine, but there is also critical care medicine, as it is my case, but surprisingly anesthesiology as well. Nephrology training in career, it follows 2 paths. The traditional academic path there is a prerequisite of internal medicine residence over 2 years. Then nephrology residence, there's akin to the fellowship in other countries, more 2 years. And it provides automatic recognition by the Federal Council of Medicine. And the lateral sensu path, which requires also an internal medicine training period. And it's a broad specialization course based on theoretical and practical issues. It takes 2 years to qualify to professional practice, but since it's not full-time based, it requires a board exam by the Brazilian Society of Nephrology to be recognized by the Federal Council of Medicine. Nephrology earnings and revenues is mostly tied to renal replacement therapy provision. The annual personal earnings of a Brazilian nephrologist is between $25K and $100K US dollars per year, but it depends very much. It usually leans towards the lower end of the spectrum, and depends on experience, the type of employment, the multiplicity of jobs and positions, and the local area of practice. The system relies on the payment for single dialysis treatment sessions. It pays about $38 per session in the UHS, and between $48 to $156 in the insurance and health plans of the private sector, again leaning towards the lower end of the range. And hospital-based dialysis is provided by the United Health System. It pays only $52 per session, so that leaves all continuous CRRT therapies out of the UHS spectrum, and it pays much more in the private sector. Brazil has Brazil is like doing a good party, so World Kidney Day is a major party in the country with many celebrities, monuments, buildings being lighted and prepared for the event, and that shows the registered activities in Brazil over the last few years. There was this was less over the last year. We don't have the numbers yet, and it just occurred this year, and we have a very high turnout, virtual turnout. So what are the challenges? We do have many challenges. Detailed countrywide data on the epidemiology of kidney disease is virtually absent. We have only data on dialysis patients. We need to improve clinical kidney care. There's a rising prevalence of hypertension, diabetes, and CKD. We need to address the renal replacement therapy gap in the poorest regions of the country. As I've shown, there's a large difference in dialysis provision in different regions. We need to increase the interest among medical graduates, as in many other countries. The UHS reimbursement for kidney-related therapies is very little attractive. There is a widespread country dialysis capacity, but PDU is still underutilized. Businesses, mainly multinational companies, investment funds, are buying out dialysis clinics and turning nephrologists into their employees. So there's a tendency to deprofessionalize healthcare workers and enforce corporate models of health. Efficiency should ultimately increase patient-related outcomes, but the national system focus on cost containment and business focus, of course, in increased revenue. So we have a major way to go. On the other side, the highlights. Brazil has is well organized. Nephrology in Brazil is well organized as a medical specialty and society. The publicly funded UHS promotes universal access to healthcare for the entire population. This includes primary care and renal replacement therapy. The regulatory agencies have set a high quality standard for dialysis. There is a booming renal transplantation program that ranks among the top largest in the world, and possibly dynamic changes within the renal replacement therapy sector due to foreign acquisition. The foreign acquisition frenzy is a new development that will certainly affect nephrology in the country. And with that, I thank you all. Thank you very much.